The following is a presentation from the MJCast, the internet's premier podcast on all things Michael Jackson.
I'm a Black American. I am proud of who I am.
Together, we can make a change in the world.
I want to see you!
I like to take sounds and put them under the microscope.
There's a driving bass, you become the bass.
Let the music write itself.
I don't sing it if I don't mean it.
Welcome to the MJCast, your source of news, discussion, and interviews on the King of Pop.
Hello and welcome to episode 168 of the MJCast. I'm Charles Thomson and this is our annual June 13th episode, also known as our Vindication Day episode, this year marking the 19th anniversary of the verdicts in Michael Jackson's 2005 trial. I'm joined today by a fan, scholar, and activist who's interacted with and campaigned for Michael Jackson over several decades, having amazing adventures and accruing an arsenal of fantastic stories along the way. So please welcome to the show my friend, Gratian Dimech. How are you doing, Gratian?
Very well, thank you. What an intro. I'm very honoured to be here. And wonderful.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. A couple of years ago, I drew up a list of people for Jamin who I said we really needed to get on the show to tell their stories, and you were on it. So I'm glad that you're finally here. And I've not made any plans today as to what we're going to talk about. I've not got a list of questions here or anything like that, so we're going to have to wing it a bit.
We can wing it. That's good.
I think we should start by introducing you to the audience a little bit for anybody that doesn't know who you are. So you're based in the UK?
Yes.
Whereabouts are you comfortable saying where?
I'm comfortable, yes. Langley, which is just outside of London.
And I guess we should start at the beginning, really. So you spent all these years following Michael Jackson around the world, meeting him, campaigning for him, campaigning alongside him. But how did it all begin? What was your first introduction to Michael Jackson?
Well, I was 7 going on 8 years old, and I was living in a suburb of London called Mitcham, which is not particularly inspiring. But my neighbour gave me a cassette of Thriller. This was, say, 1983, early 1983. And I had never heard of Michael Jackson, never heard of him, hadn't heard the music, didn't know about Off the Wall, the Jackson 5. I was completely oblivious to that. But I was obsessed from the second Wanna Be Starting Something came on right through to the end. It was, it hit me like a thunderbolt. And I used to make my mother play it in the car every day on the way to school. So I was sort of instantly addicted, but it was to the music. So the cassette was a recording from an LP, so I hadn't seen the cover. I had never seen a video. So I wasn't really aware. I even sort of remember hearing A Girl Is Mine and being confused when the voice changed. And well, in my 7-year-old brain, I wasn't sure what was going on. But yeah, it was the music that really stuck with me first. So that's how it all began. I think my neighbor was called Abba. I always remember that, but we didn't keep in touch.
And you say you were how old when you got that tape?
Well, I think this was 1983, so I was 7, going on 8. Yeah, 7 years old.
So at that time, you know Michael's voice, you know his music, but he's a bit of an alien concept. You don't know what he looks like. You don't know anything about him. He's just a voice that you're hearing through the speakers or through your headphones.
Yeah, he's just a voice. It's just the music. And obviously Thriller, I don't even think I was aware of the cultural impact of Thriller. So it's not like obviously there was no internet. I wasn't really at that age watching anything on the news or seeing anything like that. So that slowly unfurled after the next year or so, because then you couldn't avoid it. And then the Thriller video came out, and so the obsession just grew and grew. And I think it was a time where I had just moved. We'd spent a year in Malta, which is where my family are from. We'd lived there for a year, and then I suddenly came back to live in Mitcham, and I think it was like escapism for me. So it was quite exciting to go into that whole world. And I think I had like pop music before that, but Thriller really just opened up my world, just the excitement and the drama and just everything that the entire world came to feel for Thriller is what I felt as a 7-year-old boy.
You just mentioned the Thriller video, so do you remember the first time you actually did see Michael Jackson and what your reaction was to understanding who he actually was, the man behind the voice?
Well, yeah, this was many, many years ago. So I think I've got a memory of seeing Say, Say, Say randomly on TV, which I think was that 1983? Pretty sure it was. And obviously, Say, Say, Say isn't on Thriller, but I recognized something of his voice, and I was like, oh my gosh, is that him? I think that was the first time. And obviously, he's got quite a striking look. So I think I started putting it together. With Thriller, you have to be in that time. It was such a thing where obviously you didn't have YouTube where you could just access something at any point. So you'd hear talk of it in the classroom. Oh, this guy's got a VHS of Thriller. I didn't have one straight away, but you'd go around to someone's house. I think I remember going around to someone's house and they played Thriller, which again that's a whole other thing. And at that age, I was sort of mesmerized, terrified that it was just, again, another level of impact. And so I'm sure pretty soon after, my mum would have bought me the VHS of the making of Thriller whenever that came out.
There's probably around the world many millions of people who could describe the same kind of trajectory here in terms of hearing Michael's music and then watching the video and being amazed by it. But not everybody's story then continued in the trajectory that yours did, because you ended up following Michael around the world and is essentially becoming somebody that he knew. So can you talk us through the progression of your sort of fandom? So how did you get from this point where you're 7, 8 years old and watching Michael on TV and loving him? How did you get from there to this kind of super fan world of following Michael around the world on tour and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, so obviously Michael opened up my love of pop music in general. And I do feel that in the 80s that pop music was sort of more relevant and bigger as a cultural thing than it is now, bar, Taylor Swift or something. So I think people would talk about it a lot in class, and you'd have a little discussion, this one versus this one, Wham versus Duran Duran, Michael versus Prince, etc., all of those kind of things. Well, I think there'd be little things like Motown 25 would be on TV, and that would be another level again. So that would be, I'd have recorded that from the TV and I would have worn it out. I would have played it so many times. And I think that's where I started to learn about the Jackson 5 and all of that music. So bit by bit, I would go back and then listen to Off the Wall. And my mum might buy me an annual or one of these books about the Victory Tour. It was just growing and growing. And of course, then it sort of maybe became a quieter time. Oh, you had We Are the World as well. So all of these things that would keep you interested and sort of exciting events that would, really inspire me. But then there was a bit of a lull, wasn't there, leading up to Bad. It's not like I could have seen Captain EO or anything like that. So maybe I'd get into some of the other kind of pop music of the day. But I think Bad, when that came out, they had The Legend Continues. They had all of that build up. I think it was on the news. And I remember me and my sister dancing around the living room when a little clip of Bad, the first clip of Bad I had ever seen, came on. And, he looked quite different, quite startling, but in a good way. The whole thing was exciting. The video seemed exciting. The song was amazing. And I think that was another sort of plot point. What really inspired me to follow maybe was also in 1988, I think I was living quite near the Mayfair Hotel where Michael was staying. And it was in the Evening Standard that he was coming to the airport. So this must have been something like 13th of July, 1988. And somehow I managed to persuade my mum, who's very, very understanding, and because I think she used to, she was always into the Rolling Stones. So she understood my obsession, really. So she let me go to the West End, like 12 years old, to go and wait outside his hotel, which I did. And I think that was the first time I saw him in person. I had a little camera and I took a couple of photos. So that was yet another thing that escalated everything. And I met loads of people there, some of which are still my friends today, like Menifer and her brother Ben and Tosh, Claire. A lot of my friends I met there who have become lifelong friends, and they were a little gang that followed round. And I think I was inspired by them as well. Yeah, over the years we've followed Janet, and we've had so many adventures together. And then I saw Moonwalker, and so I did get to see 3 bad shows, 3 concerts. So that's another thing, that just the adrenaline and the excitement of things like, Another Part of Me live, all of those things, Dirty Diana, all of those things were so exciting to me when I was younger.
What was on the Bad tour?
Yeah.
You're still quite young there, so I'm guessing you weren't in the mosh pit. What were your early experiences of seeing Michael in concert?
Well, actually, so the very first concert I ever saw was the 16th of July, which is the one that they sort of released, the albeit low quality version, the one that Princess Diana was at. And so that's the first concert that I ever saw. And yeah, you're right. I wasn't in the mosh pit, although I very much wanted to be. I was just at the side, as close as I could be. I wasn't I was still so happy to be there, so I wasn't worried about that. But then, having seen that, I wanted more. So I had to push my mum to get me another ticket. So I went for a second time. Can't remember the date of that one. And then I had to push her again because I still wasn't done. And I went to Milton Keynes. And on that one, I tried to get nearer the front. So I sort of went down to the front and got as close as I could, but I was probably still 15 people back or so, and I was at the side. But I think, yeah, I well and truly had the bug by then.
So how were you getting these tickets? I thought they were all sold out well in advance, the Bad concerts.
Well,
Were they scalped?
Gosh, it was so much easier than now. I feel sorry for teenage Taylor Swift fans who want to go and see her, and the tickets are like £800 and plus even. I think things were a little easier back then, even if something was sold out. But I can't remember because, I was a child, so my mum got me the tickets. So thank you, Mum. I think actually one came from Father Christmas, so I got it in my stocking. So that was a good one.
What do you recall about the concerts themselves and your reactions to them?
Just a real sort of adrenaline hit. Like I was so like revved up and excited by the whole thing, and he just seemed like this untouchable star. So to see him in person, even if he was a bit further away, was just a magical experience. So just to be part of it, it was a very exciting time. Obviously, I was the right age to be. I'd been sort of begging my mum to go to concerts before that, but I was a bit young. But luckily, by the Bad tour, she was willing to let me go. I don't think I would have forgiven her otherwise. I don't know. He just seemed untouchable, and just the whole thing. The kind of songs that he had, like "Smooth Criminal" and all of that, were very appealing to my 12-year-old self. I'd go outside the hotel, the Mayfair Hotel. Actually, I got interviewed by MTV. This is something my friends have never forgotten. And I sort of went there in some makeshift bad outfit that my mum had made. And I was outside the hotel and I got interviewed. And they asked me, what is it about Michael? And I think I just said, oh, he's unique. And it made the cut. So Usually about every year someone posts that on my Facebook timeline or something and reminds me he's unique. So I'll go with that. What did I feel? He's unique. That's what I felt at that time.
What was that in the Bad Around the World doc?
Yes. I'm not sure. It's what there are. I don't know why I forget. It's one of those. Like, what was there? Motown to Your Town, Bad Around the World, Another Part of Me. Sorry, I can't remember exactly which one it is from them. It was one that was broadcast in 1988 about the Bad Tour, and it had, a selection of people going, "Oh my God, he's amazing. He's so good looking." This, that, and the other, and then just me going, "He's unique," and that was it. Blink and you miss it, but my friends didn't miss it. So
I think you're right. There was something about pop stars generally back then that did feel a bit more untouchable and otherworldly. And I think it's because you mentioned earlier about there would be these droughts, when Michael would disappear or when whoever it was you were into would disappear because things
yeah,
were on the TV and then they were gone. There was no internet, there was no on demand. Even
yeah.
VHS was in its infancy and it was rare to have
Unless if you
something.
caught it on VHS,
Yeah,
yeah,
unless
then yeah.
you sort of taped it yourself, then it would be on TV that night and then you might never see it again. So yeah, there would be these long periods of sort of blackout where you'd see nothing of Michael Jackson. And so that kind of encouraged a kind of a scavenger hunt type mentality in the fans. I remember when I was a kid, you wouldn't even know if Michael was working on an album or anything. I used to go into the local record stores and say, "Have you got anything about a new Michael Jackson album?" And I remember when one day
Yes.
they finally said, "Yes, we've got it in our release schedule. It's coming out in 4 months or something," and that would have been Invincible. So, talk about a letdown. But
Oh. Yeah, I did the same thing. I would go into the record store. Sometimes they'd have it up on a little board. Sometimes I'd ask, but that's how you found out. That's how you found out in those days. Or through a fanzine like Off the Wall or one of those phone lines. I think that's another thing I got into, which was there was a friend of mine at the time, Denise Pfeiffer. She ran a magazine called Jackson Action. And because I'd met her at the Mayfair Hotel, she put me in as mega fan because I had a huge collection. I had posters plastered on my wall. And again, this is a story for a lot of fans. I think I even had stuff on my ceiling. It was just wall to wall clippings from smash hits, posters, anything. So I'd built up quite a collection of everything. I'd buy this, 7-inch single, the 12-inch single, all of that, magazine covers. So she put me in the magazine as a mega fan. I think it was part of Off the Wall at that point, which was a magazine that Adrian Grant started. That was another thing. And I saw her, the same fan, in Moonwalker, holding up a sign in Man in the Mirror at the beginning saying, "My 14th concert." And at the time, that blew my mind. You've been to 14 concerts? And I wanted to do the same. So that was another thing.
so we get the Bad tour. You see Michael 3 times. But I know that by the time the Dangerous tour rolls around a few years later, it's a very different story for you.
Yeah.
So let's start heading in that direction. What was life like for you in the gaps? So Michael comes to London 1988, you see him 3 times. Then you've got a long wait, especially for a young person. If you were about, how old were you at the time? About 12?
Yeah.
Waiting 4 years for the next thing to happen feels like an eternity. So what was life like for young Gratian in the gaps when you were waiting for Michael to do something? Were you sort of just like chomping at the bit, or were you quite content in a Michael-free environment?
Oh, no, not content at all. Chomping at the bit. Like you say, I would be counting down the days, waiting for news. Sometimes, if you're lucky, a song title would leak and I'd write it down and I'd try to imagine it. And no, so it was very much, especially Bad had such a big impact on me as a record. And I think there's so many great things about Michael, the entertainment, the concert and all of that, the looks. But actually, it was always the thought of a new album that excited me the most. So I think because it started with the music, so I was always, that's where it had to start. So invariably I'd take a day off school or something like that just on the day an album was released. So no, I was into other things. I was into other music. Sort of Janet sometimes filled the gap. And so Rhythm Nation came out, and the sort of same friends that I'd met around the Mayfair Hotel days in 1988, we would follow Janet around London, that is, and, break into like TV studios to watch her on Going Live. That was a program in the 80s, and other things like that. And so we could get a bit closer to Janet. And so a few of us met her, and then later I met her a few times, went up to her hotel suite. She used to give us front seat tickets to her tour, so that was quite good. So we had the bug for things like that, but Michael was the main course, and that's what I was waiting for. And can I just say, there was the Off the Wall Day, so the magazine that Adrian Grant started up, he would do a fan day, and the very first Off the Wall Day, it was in Hammersmith Palais, and there was a competition to meet Michael. And so I bought as many tickets as I could, raffle tickets. I spent about £40 at the time, which was a lot. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up winning that competition. So I think I was about 14, 15. So I was very excited about that. It didn't happen for about 2 years. It happened on a Dangerous tour. It was backstage at Wembley I met him, but that was all because I'd won the competition at the Off the Wall Day a couple of years prior. So I didn't know if it was ever going to happen, but Adrian made good, obviously, and that was one of the most exciting days.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit more about these magazines then, like the one that Adrian ran. What were they like, and how important were they to you as a fan in that pre-internet age?
They were vital to the fan back then. Pre-internet, hard to imagine, but actually, you'd go into, say, Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus and rifle through their magazine rack, and then probably one day I just saw this Off the Wall magazine, which Adrian Grant started up, and it was so important because that's the only place there was that kind of news. Like, obviously, the tabloids or the newspapers would be like, "Oh, Michael Jackson, the oxygen chamber," and all of that. But this was actually telling you about the music, when the album's coming out, who's he working with. And especially in the run-up to Dangerous, it was pretty much the only place you'd find that. I think eventually it turned into a phone line. I did call it as well, like a premium phone line, so, shouldn't call that too much. But that's where you got your news. So you'd eagerly await one. They probably only came out every couple of months or 3 months, but they were great, and they were full of fan stories, other people out there, but mainly the news about the forthcoming album or tour, that kind of thing. So, yeah, they were really important. So thank you to Adrian for starting up such an amazing magazine, which was, the lifeblood for fans at that time.
You mentioned filling the Michael gaps with these Janet interactions. So was it just a coincidence that Michael Jackson's sister you also thought was amazing, or was the allure just that she was Michael Jackson's sister?
Well, for me personally, I can only answer for me personally. There were other music by other family members that I wasn't particularly interested in. I don't necessarily want to name them, but Janet's seemed a level up. So I think the first thing I heard was "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" and those kind of things from Control, and then Rhythm Nation. I think Janet's music appealed to Michael fans generally, especially at the time. It was like the dessert, it did fill the gap. So I did genuinely like the music, because like I said, I wasn't into necessarily every single bit of music by every Jackson. I know some fans are, but yeah, I definitely was appealed to Janet's stuff. I still love the music, but Michael was very much a step up, to say the least.
So when Michael re-emerges with Dangerous, I think one of the most talked about things at the time was the quite radical change in his appearance.
Yeah.
So back then, again, in the pre-internet days where you might go months, you might even go a year without Michael being on TV, or, what was your reaction when he would reappear looking quite different than the last time you'd seen him?
Yeah, I did have reactions. Actually, just to skip back quickly to the bad era, that was more pronounced because I was used to seeing the making of Thriller, all of those ones. And I remember being on holiday in August, maybe in a run up to just before Bad was going to come out. The Bad album cover was on the front page of something that's not around anymore called Sky Magazine. I think I did a double take, literally. I walked past it and then looked back and I was like, oh, that's Michael. And I was sort of shocked, but I mean, I thought he looked great. So I think I was still quite young. I didn't think about it too deeply, but it was noted. For Dangerous, I think by that point, because of the magazines and maybe me being a bit more aware of newspaper articles, you might see a progression. So you would have seen the in-between phases leading up to that. But yeah, it didn't go unnoticed that he was looking different, but I thought he looked great. I don't know how deeply I thought about it. Obviously, his skin color, we didn't know about the vitiligo back then. I think he'd put something in Moonwalk about good lighting and his diet or something, and I probably just took that on face value and didn't think about it too much.
I recall when I was at school that if it was known that you were a Michael Jackson fan, then that was to your disadvantage. So around that time, I mean, the Sun by that time had started calling him Wacko Jacko. Obviously, people were talking about his skin lightening and all that kind of stuff. So what was life like for you as a young fan at that time outside of fan circles?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, even from Thriller, and people would never believe this now, there was even some negativity around the Thriller era. So I remember people in my class going, oh, you only like him because it's werewolves and it's gimmicky and it's not real music and all of this. I'm like, yeah, sure. I remember one of my uncles saying, oh, you'll grow out of him soon and all of that kind of thing. Obviously, it got a bit more vicious over the years, as I'm sure you're aware. And I hated all of that stuff, you know. Obviously, at this point in time, we can look back on stuff about oxygen chambers and all of that as just a bit of light tittle tattle and almost nostalgic. You know, who cares about that stuff with some of the stuff we're facing now? But for me, I went to a boys' school in the end, and I've always been quite Teflon, so I'm kind of loud and proud about it. And yeah, I'm sure sometimes people come and go, oh, Michael, but nothing really fazed me or bothered me. And I think Michael was quite popular with a lot of people. I suppose I remember when things like hip hop came in, and if you're a boy, you're supposed to be into all of that stuff. I'm not saying I didn't like some of that R&B and all of those things that were more popular, but I remained staunch with Michael, and I didn't let anyone drag me down about it. Really, I would argue and fight about it. I was very sort of defiant.
So let's talk about the Dangerous tour. The Bad tour, you saw 3 concerts. On the Dangerous tour, how many concerts did you see?
I saw 35 concerts. Yeah, I did. I saw 35. So I was 16 and I had just done my GCSEs. And so it was summer break. And I had decided at that point, I sold my collection. So all of my great stuff I had, these cutouts that I used to go and get from the shops, all the display things, my rare records, E.T. Storybook, the dolls, everything. I sold it to make a bit of money because I decided I'd rather go and see him live. So I bought what was called an Interrail pass, which was, you know, you can go on any train around Europe. And I got a sleeping bag. This was with a group of friends, so who were a bit older than me. I think that's why my mum allowed it, because there were a few adults there. Well, I mean, you know, 2 or 3 years older than me. And so she knew I'd be looked after. So yeah, I set off on that just was one of the greatest summers of all time. Can you imagine 16 years old, set out to watch every single date of the beginning of the Dangerous tour? And so it really was an adventure of a lifetime. And even when I speak to my friends about that now, we just talk about that summer as it was just something else.
So tell me about the VIP passes, because I'm sure I've heard a story about some bootleg VIP passes that you guys all were
Yeah.
using.
Well, firstly, I had a genuine one from meeting him backstage on one of the Wembley dates. And I think at the beginning we slowly went into it. At the beginning it was all kosher, we'd queue outside. But we realised it wasn't sustainable, much to some of the other fans who'd queued up all day, and we'd sort of find a way to leapfrog in front of them and just be in the stadium. So apologies to anyone who's listening and remembers that kind of behaviour. But we had to get in because we were travelling around Europe, so we needed other solutions. We couldn't queue overnight for each gig, and we were desperate to be front row. It was non-negotiable. And I don't remember who first did it, but there was me, Justin.
Our listeners might know him better as Waldo, and he's the guy with the blonde curtains who seems to be in the footage of every Michael concert you've ever seen.
Well, yeah, in the beginning, we were a little duo, so actually not as many people know. It's a bit like Grease 1 and Grease 2, or Teen Wolf 1, Teen Wolf 2. I was Waldo 2. So
I think Brett Barnes told us about Waldo too.
yeah,
I think possibly when we spoke to Brett Barnes, he said that one of the things they would do from backstage, they'd be looking at the crowd and saying, "Can you see Waldo? And can you see Waldo too?"
yeah, and that was me and Justin. But I think Justin, Waldo was his in the end. Waldo 2 faded into obscurity, but I was Waldo 2.
Actually, I think probably just for international listeners, it might be worth us explaining what the fuck this means. So, in
Yeah.
England, we have a series of picture books called Where's Wally, with a guy in a red and white striped jumper. And they're pictures, very intricate pictures with hundreds and hundreds of people and different things going on. And you have to find Wally. And the books are called Where's Wally? But in America, the books are called Where's Waldo? And so the reason Michael called you guys Waldo was because every day they would look out into the crowd amidst these hundreds and thousands of people and try to pick you out in the same way that you would pick Waldo out in the picture books. So that was how Justin became Waldo and you became Waldo too.
Which was where we found that out. That obviously it's hilarious to us. We were very flattered and excited by that, but it's very funny. Because actually, I told you that I met him backstage at Wembley. Justin did too. So Waldo 1. He also met Michael on that same day, and Michael said to us, "Oh, I recognize you guys," because he'd seen us from the front rows. It was already a few dates into the tour, so he had just started to recognize us.
And how much of a meeting was that? So you win this meeting with Michael, you go backstage on the Dangerous tour. That seems like a story you should tell us in as much detail as you can.
Yeah, well, it was very exciting. I remember all of it. So for a start, I'd been waiting a couple of years for this to actually materialize as having won this competition. I think then there was a second fan day, and that's where Justin also won the competition. So yeah, it was. I mean, I was 16 years old. It was just the adrenaline was going right through me. I was quite nervous then. I've met him subsequently other times. I was much calmer, but I could barely talk this time. I was sort of ushered backstage by one of his bodyguards, and there were sort of layers of backstage VIP. And then it was just getting more and more, we're getting deeper in there. And suddenly I became aware that the next barrier was Michael was behind in this little room. And I sort of froze. Justin, Denise, and Adrian went in much quicker, and the guy had to sort of push me in. I don't know why. I was just like really taken back. And he was just inside there, complete in his what I always called the dangerous gold bikini outfit, with no glasses on. And he comes straight up to us and shakes our hand. "Oh, hi. Oh, I recognize you guys." And I'm still at this point, I don't even know if I said anything to him. I hope I said hi, but I don't really remember. I was just quite startled, especially that he was looking like it was before he would have gone on stage, so pre-toaster. And it's obviously just a quick meet and greet backstage scenario. Sam Emerson's there taking pictures. I think Brett Barnes was at the side playing on an arcade game. And it was just a couple of pictures, but I remember that Justin and Denise and Adrian, who were there as well, they were, Justin asked for a hug, maybe, I think, and they were like, "Oh, I love you," and he got embarrassed. So he said, "Oh, I'm embarrassed," and then he put his glasses on. So unfortunately, our picture now is, well, I'm being a bit ungrateful for that because most people would have killed for that meeting. So, but he didn't have his glasses on at first, and then he put them on because he was embarrassed because he recognized us. But I don't think I said much, but it was amazing. And then we went back into the show, and that was the only one I wasn't really front row on because it was too soon before the concert. So I was sitting in the VIP bit at the side, I think next to Des O'Connor, but anyone who isn't British won't remember that. But I think Justin, who was, he was more of a fighter, so I think somehow he probably got to front row, fought through everyone and got there, but I sat that one out. But that was just incredible because that was the first real meeting. He was more, I'm not going to say it became easier to meet him later on, but in those days he really was very elusive, untouchable. So that was really exciting. Also, just before, the first time I saw him after the Bad tour performing was by chance got into the Give In To Me video shoot. So I was on the front row of the Give In To Me video shoot. That was a couple of days before the first Munich concert. So he'd obviously, I think he'd have seen me there too.
Before we get on to Give In To Me, more importantly, what did Des O'Connor make of the Dangerous show?
Well, I think he was enjoying it, and he stole a couple of my chips, and yeah, good time had by all.
Okay, so you just casually mentioned that, and then before the tour, there was this thing where I got into the Give In To Me video. So how did that happen?
Sorry, I'm flicking around like my brain's sparking around, bouncing around like a pinball. Yeah, so we had traveled there, we were staying outside hotels in our sleeping bag and all of that. So we were at his hotel in Munich, and we were there maybe 3 days before the opening of the Dangerous tour in Munich. And we were walking around town. I mean, I was always following the girls, they would always know what's going on, and I would just follow around sort of haplessly. And so I don't know how much of a coincidence it was, but I didn't know about it. And we were walking around one lunchtime. He'd left the hotel, and we came across a big queue of Guns N' Roses fans outside this abandoned subway station. So obviously we were curious, and we quickly realized it was a Michael Jackson shoot, and inevitably sort of weaved our way to the front. Because I think obviously Michael wanted a hard rock look to this video, so he wanted rockers, and that's why I think Guns N' Roses fans had been invited to this show. They thought it was a Guns N' Roses performance. They hadn't been told it was Michael Jackson. And Michael, or the director, probably didn't want a bunch of Heal the World wearing T-shirts, and just the Michael Jackson fan has a slightly different look in general. I don't want to generalize too much, but I think they were going for a different look. But we weaved our way right to the front row. A handful of us, I can't remember. I don't think Justin was at that one, but Maria, and I can't remember who else. Yeah, so my friend Monica from Germany, she was there. She might have been the one who sort of lured us towards the set. So we were there front row, and this front row was unlike the concert front row. I was at the very front row, and I could put my hand out, and his boot was touching my hand. So I was almost looking up to watch him perform, which was mind-blowing. So imagine the last thing I saw was a Bad tour from 15 rows back in Milton Keynes, and then I've gone straight in the deep end. I'm suddenly watching him perform Give In To Me. I think it was about 4 or 5 times. He had just come on and off, and Slash was on stage, and I can't remember, I think maybe the keyboard player from Guns N' Roses as well. But we were right there. And obviously Michael wouldn't have known us at this point, and he didn't really interact with us. Maybe he swooped his hand down, and we'd get a little, put our hands out, try to touch his boot. He'd always be like a millimeter away. But I was just looking up at Michael Jackson. Like, can you imagine the view? That was just one of the greatest fan experiences I've had, actually. And to have that a couple of days before the opening of the Dangerous tour, I felt so lucky. It was just amazing.
So can you see yourself in the video if you watch it today?
I've looked so hard, and especially as quality's got better and we've got into HD and all of that, I've got a bigger screen now. I really look. I don't think I can see myself. However, a friend of mine called Sven, who recently bought all of Sam Emerson's photos, he did show me one where you could see that it was me and Maria on the front row. So, yeah, I don't think, like I said, I don't think they were going for the look. I had this long hair. I was probably wearing a Michael Jackson Dangerous t-shirt. I don't think that's what they wanted. And actually, if you look at the video, the crowd is more of a blur. It's more of a feel. I don't think you see individual shots, but I always did look. I was hoping I would be, but I was disappointed, unfortunately. But the overall thing was just mind-blowing.
So a few days later, you're at Munich for the first concert of the Dangerous tour, and there's something you may be able to help us settle.
Yes.
Which is that over the years on the MJCast, we have had some people on who worked on the Dangerous tour. So did you go to every European Dangerous concert?
Okay, so I went to almost all of the first leg of the European part of the Dangerous tour. And then later on, I went to the second part. I went to Taiwan, Tel Aviv. I went to a few after that.
Okay.
But I missed a few European ones towards the end. But Justin, Waldo, and all of my other friends went to all of them. So there are some of our group who saw even more concerts than I did.
Okay. So do you, because we've had some dispute about this on MJCast between people who worked on the tour. We have people that worked on the tour who are adamant that one night they performed Remember the Time. And then we have had other people who are adamant that they did not. So do you recall Remember the Time ever being performed at a Dangerous concert?
Okay, look, it was never performed to the public. And I did, having heard this from, I thought Eddie Garcia's podcast was brilliant. He's a great guy. And I know to other people, they're like, well, he actually worked on a tour and he would know and all of that. And I accept that people would think that. But think about it from a fan's perspective. You really wouldn't forget seeing Remember the Time live. And I did go to all of the German dates, and I believe Eddie Garcia said it was a German date. However, we did hear it being rehearsed. And I believe maybe one time it was an instrumental. Sometimes they'd put an instrumental in between songs. And I think one time we heard In the Closet, things like that. But Michael never performed them. He wouldn't even have been on stage. And so I promise you, with all the love in the world and respect for those great people who were part of Michael's tour, and I did check for the remaining dates that I wasn't at. I remember between me and my friends, we covered every single date. And I did check. I checked with Justin, I checked with Lumbee, I checked with many of my friends because I was intrigued. I said, no, am I going crazy? It was never performed, and there's no evidence that it was. No one's got any video or pictures. I know it wasn't quite like it is now with smartphones, but you'd think there'd be something. So I hate to be like, a party pooper, but we would have loved to Remember the Time. So as far as I'm aware, the only time it's ever been performed, I know it was they did it on the Dangerous rehearsals, because we've all seen those videos that are available on YouTube. And also he did the wheelchair performance. But we would have remembered. Honestly, there's no way I would have forgotten that he sang Remember the Time. So that's my perspective on it. And I did check with other fans, and no one had any recollection of it being done in Europe, Tokyo, or anywhere. So I think it would be quite easy for them, because they clearly did rehearse Remember the Time. And I think so those memories have been conflated. I mean, remember, this was the 90s, quite a long time ago. So I'm not blaming them. But I'd say no, it wasn't performed.
So some time ago, you were about to tell me a story about some dodgy VIP passes, and then we've got somewhat sidetracked. So you went to these 35 concerts on the Dangerous tour, and as I understand it, there was some chicanery around how you achieved that. So just talk us through exactly how you did achieve that staggering number of concerts.
Yeah, so, I mean, we did have tickets in general, but it wasn't about that, it was about getting to the front, getting in early, not having to queue the night before, because sometimes we were going into a country and we wouldn't have been able to, would be there on a day of the show. So we had to work something out. And one of us obviously got a pass from somewhere, possibly from me and Justin when we met him backstage at Wembley, because we didn't do that until afterwards. Anyway, someone got one. It was just a colour photocopy which had been laminated. Maybe one of us cut out a bit of tinfoil to make it look like it's got the the stamp or whatever to make it look authentic. And it worked every time because it's all about the attitude, how you walk in, how you do it. And what we'd do is get in, usually 9 times out of 10 we'd get in, and we'd sort of wander around. We'd be in there a couple of hours before the show, and we'd wander around. We might hide in the toilet or behind a seat. We'd try and blend in, and then we'd sense when it's coming up to the time for doors opening, and we'd start walking towards the front row. And in the beginning, it was quite easy because there was only a handful of us doing it, very small amount of us doing it, and we'd get away with it. And then I felt a bit sorry for the fans who'd run in and see that the front row, well, it wouldn't be, at that point it was only a few of us, but it did grow, let me tell you, more and more people as the tour went on, to the point that it was quite ridiculous. It'd be like they'd come in and the front row would be majority taken, but we had to. That's how we saw it anyway. I mean, my friend David Lumby, who also followed the tour, there was one time, I think it was Amsterdam Arena, it was touted as one of the most secure arenas ever. And I don't even think we had a pass for that. We just sort of found a gap in the fence, went in, and the security guard chucked us out, the same one, 7 times. And in the end, he just went, we said, we just want to go to the front row. He was like, oh, fine, just go then. You just let, he goes, you're only going to get back in again. And so we persuaded this guy. We just walk up to the front. Oh, it has to be said also, we had some assistance from Michael's crew. So there would be people like Sam Emerson, his photographer. There'd be other people on the tour who were just on our side. They knew we were harmless. We just wanted to be at the front. And to be honest with you, Michael liked us being at the front because he knew he'd get a great reaction. And I think he recognized us, obviously, and he was trying to spot us. It was part of the game, wasn't it? So they would always help us. If any local security were trying to get rid of us, Michael's crew would keep us there in the end. So, yeah, a bit of an unfair advantage, but hey-ho.
And once you had this established routine of being at the front for every concert, would he interact with you? Would he give you a wave or give you a smile or a nod, or was there some back and forth with you?
It was very competitive, between us. We all wanted attention from Michael. Some of us were very good at getting it. Justin, in particular, he would get a lot of attention. Because you have to remember, he sort of had this bright blonde hair, so he was somewhat easier to spot amongst generally dark-haired people. And so he got a lot of attention. But I did sometimes, I remember in Wembley, my friend James came along with me, and this was the concert after I'd met him. And he's more of a casual fan, but he was like, Michael keeps pointing at you and looking at you. And, this means the world to us at that point. We're like, wow. I think I remember one time he was like, if you're thinking about being my brother, and he pointed at me, and I'm like, oh my God, wow. I think there is some footage of Justin and I, well, there's a lot of footage in general, but there's one in particular of Justin and I head banging to Black or White. That's quite funny. So we're on a lot of that footage. And also the girls like, see that girl, Human Nature, see that girl, and he'd always point at someone. So there was a lot of interaction. And also a couple of my friends went up for She's Out of My Life, and then on the next tour, You're Not Alone. So we were very much aware of that. There was I think he passed away sadly, Taco, he was called, one of the backing dancers, and he would organize the people who would walk around and do Heal the World. I used to beg him to let me be one of those people, but he never did, sadly. He didn't want me up there.
I have been over the years to a lot of concerts, including, for example, I saw Prince on the Barrier once. I got right up to the Barrier. And as much as the experience of the show is great. It is a killer. I mean, it's a lot of standing around. It's uncomfortable. Your feet are killing you the next day. Was there
Yeah.
never a point when you're, I don't know how many, 15, 20 concerts in, watching the exact same show over and over and over again, getting battered and bruised, flung up against the barrier, no sleep? Do you know what I mean? Did you never think, oh my god, I need a break now. I've had enough.
Well, do you know what? I loved it. I was 16. I was really up for it. I had the strength, not to be sexist, but it was always the girls complaining, I think, their hips and their ribs. And I understood that because it was very brutal sometimes. But I was generally always okay. However, there was one time, actually, it was in Rome, and we'd queued up. I couldn't break into that one for some reason, even though I think some other friends of mine had broken in the night before and spent the whole night in the stadium to get to the front. And it was Rome in the heat of summer, and I'd been queuing up, with the mere mortals outside. And I was feeling very hot and slightly faint, even maybe. And I did get to the front row, but I felt so off that I left. It's the only time I left. I'm not sure everyone else did. And then I went to watch it at the back of the stadium, which was, it was quite a miserable experience. But on the whole, I can't complain. I saw quite a few, so I'll be grateful.
Before we leave the first leg of the Dangerous Tour, are there any other casual give in to me video type scenarios that you need to tell us about?
Well, we weren't just seeing the concerts. We were going to the hotel. So you'd see him off the top of the balcony. He'd wave at you from there. He'd throw out pillowcases, that kind of thing. My friend David Lumby got a pillowcase. I've asked him to leave that for me in his will, assuming he dies first. And so we're always arguing about that. So we'd be looking for those interactions with Michael, like a quick handshake or seeing him run into his car. Sometimes you'd get a bit more out of him than others. But there was one time in Frankfurt, and it was on his birthday. And this hotel was a bit more of a countryside-ish hotel, and we were running around these private grounds. There was just a few of us. And we thought we found the hotel room that he was in. Usually the balcony was very high. He'd be on a penthouse. But this was just like a 2-story hotel. It was very quiet. There was no pavement, so it was all on private grounds. And so we were under there, and clearly we were talking. And we got interrupted from our little chit-chat by Michael, who was hanging over the balcony. And it was like, excuse me, guys, it was like, it was so polite about it. Oh yeah, I'm going to sleep soon, something like that, he said, being very polite. But he started talking to us, and there was another fan there who, it was also her birthday, Louisa, and they were sort of saying happy birthday to each other. And so it was just a handful of us. It was really great because we were talking to him, he was talking to us from the balcony. And he said, oh, this is the first birthday I've ever celebrated. I feel like I've heard him say that before, but he told us that was his first birthday he ever celebrated. And he said, would you like some cake? So he sent down some of his birthday cake for us. And quite a few of the fans were like, I'm keeping it, I'm not eating it. But I was hungry, so I ate it. I think I asked my friend Maria the other day, she said, I think I had one bite of the cake, and then so somewhere in her collection, she'll have this, I don't know what it would look like by now, but yeah. So that was quite an amazing little interaction. Well, I suppose we were talking to him for about 10, 15 minutes. I can't quite remember. But just for him to send down his birthday cake to us, that was quite special to kind of celebrate his birthday with him. Yeah, so that was an exciting thing. Another thing I can think of is, so the press were starting to gang up on Michael, and they did this horrible front page halfway through the tour on, I think it was the Daily Mirror, and it was a close-up of his face contorting like he did throughout the show, sweating and contorting, and it said Scarface. Actually, no, that might have been from the press conference anyway. Then they did two, and one of them was from the press conference, one was from the tour, and they were just doing these close-ups of his face and saying his nose is falling off, his face is falling apart. It was quite unfair. I mean, obviously he did have surgery and all of that, but they were picking these really unfair pictures where he's like, his face is screwed up because he's expressing something in a song. Anyway, we didn't like, it was the same photographer, and we got to know, Michael was arriving in a place called Haggerston Park in North London. So Michael's arriving at Haggerston Park in a helicopter with Minnie and Mickey Mouse, I think straight from Disneyland potentially. And he was going to visit a children's hospital there. And we saw that the photographer who'd taken these horrible pictures was there with his ultra long lens, just there like an assassin ready to get Michael, like, you know, in any way he could. And our group of fans went to, there was a farm nearby, as luck would have it, and we got some bags of manure. And as Michael landed, we pelted this paparazzi photographer with manure, so he couldn't get his shot. And which, you know, is very juvenile behavior. And it made the news. It was actually on the news that day. And the next day at the hotel, the Dorchester Hotel in London, Brett Barnes's family came out, his mum, his sister, and they would often talk to us. So they actually said, oh, we saw that. And they were really laughing about it. And they said, Michael saw it and he loved it. And we've all been laughing about it. So we felt very validated and proud of ourselves for that. So that was quite funny. And that photographer, he was very disgruntled. He said, oh, he did some interview as well, said, oh, it was childish and all of that. But we never saw him again, so job done.
And what was his name, that photographer?
Ken Lennox.
I remember the story. I remember reading it in Adrian Grant's book.
Visual documentary.
The visual documentary. I remember it being in there, which is like a date-by-date breakdown of Michael's life. But to provide some wider context, so yes, the pictures it was basically a combination of strange expressions Michael was pulling, the angle the photographer was at, and the lighting, which just made it look like Michael's face was sort of slightly disfigured. But of course, the newspaper and the photographer knew that he wasn't, because he's taken loads and loads and loads and loads of pictures at the concert and has chosen the one which is unflattering. And something that was very rare for Michael was that he actually sued. He actually did file a lawsuit over those stories. Wasn't it the Mirror? I think it was the Mirror.
It was the Mirror, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so he filed a lawsuit against the Mirror. And as part of that lawsuit, he actually underwent an independent examination of his face by a physician. So a third-party physician was called in separately from both the Mirror and Michael, and assessed Michael's face in person and wrote a report saying he doesn't have any scarring and he's not disfigured.
Yeah.
And after that, and this case went on for years, after that report by the doctor, the Mirror Group settled that lawsuit out of court. But part of the settlement was that they would do a friendly interview with Michael. That was part of the agreement that they came away with. And that was actually conducted by Piers Morgan.
Yeah.
And that is the interview which is available on YouTube now. But at the time, it was obviously written up for the paper. But if you wanted to listen to it, you had to call a premium phone line that was set up by the Mirror, and
which I did.
Yeah, and you could listen to the audio of the whole thing, and it's the interview. Very, very tellingly, it's so much later. This case went on for so long that this interview is taking place after the death of Princess Diana in 1997, and it's the interview where Piers Morgan asks Michael about Princess Diana's death. And Michael makes the very telling comment that the doctor woke him up from sleep to tell him the news, which obviously, after what happened in 2009, suddenly took on a new meaning when you re-listened to it. So that's the wider context, but that's a great story about you. Where did you find the manure at short notice? I wouldn't know where to go. I guess a garden centre, but in London, where would you go for manure?
There was a farm nearby.
In London? There was a farm in London?
So this place, like a petting zoo or something like that. This is how I remember it anyway. So it was like this big park and there was a little petting zoo nearby, something like that. And we just got these bags of manure. And actually, to be specific, mainly my friends did that. I was meeting Michael, the backstage at Wembley thing, the day after. So I was a bit afraid to be arrested, I mean, in general, but also I didn't want to miss my meeting with Michael the next day because I was in custody or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but I still wanted to be part of it. So I got a bottle of washing up liquid so that I could be a bit further back and squirt washing up liquid, which I did. And I still was on the news anyway. So, but luckily we all got away with it. Hopefully no one's listening to this and the statute of limitations has run out now.
Well, there are no statute of limitations in the UK, so you might all be arrested tomorrow.
Okay, well...
But no one was arrested at the time.
I expect that if that happens, that all of the fans will help out with a Kickstarter for our bail money.
Yeah. Okay. So we get to the end of the first leg of the Dangerous Tour. This is our Vindication Day episode, and there is an elephant that we must tackle. And that is, you are in the middle of what you described earlier as basically the greatest experience of your life. You're following Michael around on tour, seeing him live dozens of times. And then, just as the tour is about to recommence in 1993, this bomb drops, which is that Neverland has been raided and Michael is accused of molesting a child. So just talk us through your reaction as a fan. I don't know if you remember the moment, the day that you found out, but what was your immediate reaction?
So I wasn't on the tour at that time. It might have been in a break or...
It was before the news broke, just as Michael was about to set off to begin the second leg.
So I was on a London bus. This is how I remember it, actually. I was on a London bus, and the London paper, the free paper at that time, was the Evening Standard. And I think it had some horrible headline. I might be conflating this. This might have been The Sun the next day, but something on the long lines of Jackson accused of this. The next day it was something horrific like Peter Pan or pervert or something equally tabloidish and nightmarish. So, I mean, I think it hit me like a bullet in the chest. And everyone else is on the... I mean, I suppose everyone was shocked by it, but as a fan, it was what a horrific thing to suddenly hear. Of course, my instant feeling is this isn't true. Michael would never do that. He would never do that. We've been on this tour. We've been following this tour. We've seen Brett Barnes and his family on the tour. And just this wasn't the vibe that we got. I mean, obviously, we weren't behind closed doors, but we, as a whole, none of us believed this. Again, people are slightly luckier now in that they've got the internet, so you can go straight there and there'll be this, that, and the other debunking it, and there'll be people like yourself and MJCast who, around the Leaving Neverland time, were extremely helpful in debunking all of this nonsense. But back then, you're left hanging. And you've got all of the chatter is so loud. And it's really, I was only, probably 17 at that point or something like that. And it really hit hard, actually. And I think I heard Danny speak about it recently, Danny Oliver. And it was like, yeah, it's true. I agreed with what he said. It was like a loss of innocence. He's a bit younger than me. But for me, I did know what they were talking about. But I couldn't believe that someone would make such an accusation for money. I couldn't believe that this was going on. Everything about Michael Jackson had been very wholesome, very innocent. The animals, the children, Neverland, it all seemed just like it was something that was very appealing. So for that to be turned into something that was being tainted in such a way was really upsetting. But I think I went very quickly into defensive mode. And obviously, I don't know how quickly we got the even Chandler audio where he said, if I win, I'll get everything. And basically the extortion tapes, as they're known. That was all I needed to know. That was enough to say, well, it's really obvious what's going on here. But I suppose the timeline was protracted, as opposed to now when it was leaving Neverland, bam, 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 all the information comes through the next day online, or forget the next day, the next hour. So yeah, it was quite disturbing. And I think in some ways it did affect me and change me. I became far more suspicious of the press and far more aware of what people would do for money. Yeah, I was quite horrified by it, really.
So was there no point ever at which you thought, let's see how this plays out, let's see what evidence they've got? Or did you just automatically default to, I don't believe it?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So my natural reaction is, I don't believe it. Okay. But of course, any human being really is going to want to know what the evidence is. So if some evidence had come through that instantly convinced me that he was guilty, and I say that to this day because people think, oh, you like Billie Jean, and that's enough for you to forgive this kind of behavior because you're a fan and you're blinded. But actually, we tend to know a lot more about this case than other people. And I think that if we heard things that pointed towards his guilt, I don't think that we'd be supporting that. So, of course, I was always open to something coming forward. It would naturally convince you, wouldn't it? I mean, when I say I'm open, my natural barrier is to say, no, this didn't happen. That's what I believed in my heart. But obviously, we can all be fooled. So if there was some evidence that said otherwise, as there have been with other celebrities over the years, where you think they're all right and then you see the evidence. But obviously, you're someone who's much better about speaking about the case and simplifying it for people, which is what you do so well. So I don't really want to necessarily get into all of the details.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been nothing to ever convince me. And at that time, I think it was very cathartic although sad, to hear his Neverland video message to convince us of his innocence. And then also, did he do what was the award show he did afterwards where he said, I'm not only
NAACP.
Yeah. So those things were great to hear. You want to hear it from the man himself. And I'm going to side with him over a dodgy, deviant person like Evan Chandler. And when you go into that case, it's a nightmare. I believe Tom Mesereau once said, he should never have settled because we would have won that easily. So that's how I feel about that.
I think, we don't want to go into all the detail of it because it's we've done it to death over the years. So we want to talk more about your experience of it and the parts of the story that you are material to. But I just want to get an idea from you of how big a news story this was. Is there any way you can sort of quantify or just describe to us how big of a deal this was at the time?
Well, this is, like I say, it was a huge shock. I've just had this amazing experience. And now I'm sort of looking at the evil in the world. I'm suddenly looking at the evil in the world. We're no longer holding hands singing Heal the World. We've gone into soldier mode. Michael's given us so much, and we will be here to defend him. If we threw shit at a photographer who took a dodgy photograph, then, we've got his back with this as much as we can, because we're all incensed by it. We don't believe it. We know all the evidence that was available at the time that debunked it. Obviously, there was the GQ, was Michael Jackson framed, the Mary Fisher article. That was so instrumental. And fans now, younger fans, have to realize how instrumental these things were. But it was a complete earthquake. Yeah, it shook all of our lives.
What I really mean, though, is outside the fan community, just in the world, you're a fan who follows Michael around, so you're exposed to Michael all the time.
Yeah.
But when these allegations break, I mean, I was 5 years old at the time, so I have no memory of it. But was it on the TV every day? Was it in the paper every day? How
Yes.
How big of a news story was it?
All huge. I mean, as you can imagine, the media, the tabloids, not just the tabloids, all of them were salivating. And it was more and more lurid the things that they would come up with. And I've got sort of, I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to fund them these days, but back in the day, I bought all of these tabloids, and I've got sort of boxes of all of the things. And there were so many articles, guilty or not, he's finished. Is this the end? They're so happy. And that made me very angry as well. So people were talking about it. Everyone knew I loved Michael Jackson. So all of my other friends at school, my parents' friends, anyone, oh, you know, what about this? What about that? There were a few arguments here and there. So I suppose I got into a very argumentative, angry state about the whole thing. So yeah, but it didn't deter my fanhood for Michael. I believed in him. And like I say, if there was anything to say that he was guilty, then of course I wouldn't feel that same way. That's important for people to know, because it's so blasé to just go, oh, you're a fan, you're blinded. Well, we know a lot more about you, about this situation, or the jury heard more, we heard more about it. So what have you got to bring to the table? Not you directly, but...
You mentioned Brett Barnes a short while ago.
Yeah.
There is a narrative now, certainly, that's been portrayed in Leaving Neverland since Michael died, about how Michael would take these families on tour with him and would sort of keep whoever the boy was at the time sort of sequestered in a hotel room, cut off from the world, away from their families. That's a specific allegation that's made, is that the kids would be kept away from their families. I believe Bob Jones sold a book where he even claimed that Brett Barnes would be transported in luggage so that nobody knew that he was there, which always seemed a rather bizarre assertion, and one that I put to Brett when he was on the MJCast, and he just said it was bullshit. So your experiences, it sounds like, were of Brett and his family being together, coming and talking to you as a family unit. Would I be right in saying that?
You would be right, and you're right. To go back to the previous point, it's an absolute lie to say that he was snuck in with a suitcase, because he'd always walk in with Michael. So many times we used to go and wait for him, Michael going into Hamleys or going here outside the hotel. Brett would often be there. So he's not being snuck in. He's right there. And his family are also on the tour. His sister, his mum, they were very nice people. And he's Brett to this day. By the way, your MJCast with Brett, that was one of my favorite. It was so compelling. You did such an amazing job, and so nice to see that what a loyal and sort of sane, normal person Brett is. What a great guy.
So you said that you would talk to Brett with his mum and his sister together.
Can I correct that? Actually, I would speak to Brett's mother and Brett's sister when they came out of the hotel. Generally, Brett would come out with Michael. So I didn't actually speak to Brett, but they were all there. They just came out at different times.
Oh, so he was separate from his mum and his sister.
Well, they came out at different times, the times that I saw them. So I didn't see him with them when they came out. They would be, many times, Brett's mother and sister would be on the balcony waving at the fans with Brett and Michael. They'd all be up there on the hotel suite waving down. So they were present. I'm just saying, when we spoke to them, for example, after that time we pelted the photographer with manure, it was his mum and his sister that we were speaking to, not Brett. So I just want to be clear there.
Okay, but you would see them as a family unit, for example, on the balcony.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
You sent me a picture the other day when we were talking about making this episode, and it was of you at some kind of demonstration, I think in Central London. Was it at the Eros fountain in Piccadilly Circus?
Eros. Exactly, yeah.
So tell us what that was. What was that event you were pictured at?
So that was, as I can remember, quite soon after the allegations broke, and maybe before the second part of the Dangerous tour. I could be wrong there, but it was that summer, essentially. I can't remember who organised it, but it must have been one of the magazines, I imagine, because how else would people have gathered and found out about it? somehow we all gathered there. A few of us, I had a banner, said innocent until proven guilty. I'd probably have come up with something better now, but anyway, that's what I did at the time. And we were all there. The press were there. It was quite a gathering at Eros. And so just a bunch of fans. Obviously, there was the obligatory lookalikes dancing and stuff like that. So it was a bit of a circus. That's probably who the press were focusing on, because that's what they like to do. But yeah, there were loads of us there. And then I think we marched from there to Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, and probably had a few arguments with people over there and raised our voice. It was just a display, a public display of sort of love and defense for Michael. Just a show of strength. We got some media for it. I can't remember. It was on the news. I can't remember what their attitude was, but it was just something we wanted to do. Just something positive for Michael. That's what it was.
Do you remember how soon that was after the news broke? How quickly it was able to be organised?
I couldn't tell you exactly. Everything that I tell you is just from my memory, where some of the girls, I used to write down the dates and they know everything. I would have said it would have been a few weeks after, maybe sooner.
So how soon then did you jet out and rejoin the tour?
Well, I think the next one I did was Taiwan. So I went out to Taiwan, which is the furthest I'd ever been for Michael. First time I'd gone out of Europe. We arrived there before Michael, actually. And the funny thing there is that we were really the only non-Taiwanese people. So there were a group of us, they wanted to check us in to Michael's suite. But we... because they just assumed that we were his entourage when we arrived at his hotel. Of course we didn't, because his security guy, who we were friendly with, Wayne Nagin, he would have killed us. So and we had good favor with him. So we're like, no, it's not us. That wouldn't have gone down well, but that was funny. And then the subsequent concerts, it was so easy. We didn't even need to use our fake pass, because we were Westerners, as it were. We just walked straight in and they'd be like, hi, yeah, that way. So Michael must have been, he suddenly looked at the front row and it's the same as the European front row with, a few Taiwanese people here and there. Also, we caused quite a stir when we went to the hotel. The Taiwanese fans loved us. They all wanted photos with us. So it was a memorable trip, actually. I think that was also where Elizabeth Taylor and his brothers showed up. I think I sent you a picture with me with the brothers, because they showed up for some solidarity, and Elizabeth Taylor and her husband at the time, Larry Fortensky, showed up to support Michael as well. So obviously it was a hard time for Michael at that point.
Yes, and so you did Taiwan, and what other dates on the second leg?
Tel Aviv, a couple in Tel Aviv, or Istanbul, Tenerife. I think those were the ones I did on the second part. It's getting expensive at that point, going to Russia, and there's no Interrail pass for Tokyo. I know people like Justin and others, my friend David Lumby, they all went to Tokyo as well.
Did you notice a difference in Michael on that second leg with all of this going on around him?
Yeah, so to me, it felt... I know now people can look at these concerts online, but the way I felt about it at the time, he was suddenly in the black tour outfit, which he had only worn at the Munich date, the opening date, and then he went to the silver jacket, and his hair was a bit longer. And he just looked, I thought he was performing with more fire, because maybe he was angrier, had something to prove. So I thought there was extra fire in his eyes. That's certainly at the beginning part. Some people might interpret it differently, but I thought there was a different electricity in the air with the show, and just in general he was maybe slightly more elusive at the hotels, but I think he was very happy that we were all there to support him, and his fans hadn't abandoned him. So I think it meant quite a bit for us to be there, and it meant a lot to us to be able to support him.
So when the news broke that the tour had been cut short because Michael had gone to rehab. Was that then a shock to you?
Yeah, it was a shock. I had done all of the dates I was going to do. I can't remember which dates it ended on, but some of my friends were out there for sure. I know, was it Mexico or something? I can't even remember. But yeah, it was a shock. We were very worried because it's obvious that it's taking a big toll on him at that point. We were very worried. I think there was a point where no one knew where he was, the rumors of rehab, and obviously the nasty tabloid rumors that he was going away. He was doing a runner because he's guilty. He's disappearing. That was the sort of narrative that seemed to be out there. And actually, I think he was in rehab. Strangely, it was this mansion. A friend of my mum owned the mansion that he was staying in. Not that that's relevant, really. Just that made it even stranger for me when I found that out.
Did you find out while he was still there?
I didn't. And obviously, I wouldn't have gone, to make that clear, as much of a rabid fan I was, I wouldn't have gone and disturbed him at a time like that. But I found out afterwards, because that was a house I had stayed in before for the weekend, like this amazing mansion with swimming pool and all of that. And that's where he'd been staying. I think Beachy Colclough, if that's how you say his name, had been looking after him. Is that how you say his name? I think so. Elton John's guy, anyway. So, but yeah, that's really a non sequitur. That's just a fact that I found out afterwards. So yeah, we were all worried. We were worried.
You mentioned Wayne, and that there were other people in Michael's camp that you had fairly good relationships with at the time. Was it a good enough relationship that they would talk to you about how Michael was doing, how he was coping with the situation, or not?
Other people might have stories, but from, we'd speak to several people who were always friendly, would be Lavelle, Greg Fillinganes, Wayne, but they wouldn't really divulge anything like that. And half the time, I'm not even sure if they knew. Obviously, Wayne would have a better idea, but they weren't sort of giving us those kind of details. Well, certainly not to me. So, but I think it was just obvious from seeing him and knowing what was going on that this was taking its toll. It didn't have the sort of breezy, fun feel of the European leg of the Dangerous Tour.
So first you have the news of Michael cancelling the rest of the tour and going to rehab, announcing that he's developed a dependency on painkillers. And then comes the news. I mean, obviously there was a lot of news around that time, but the next really seismic news is Michael has settled the case. So do you remember hearing that news and what you thought about it at the time?
I felt gutted in a way that he did that. I felt disappointed that we didn't get to have that fight, although I understood it. It's a nightmare. My instant thought was logically that if he was guilty, he had ample chance to settle this case before it even came out. So this was clearly more of a matter that it was taking its toll on him, that there was pressure to settle it. We've all heard the reasons of the insurance, and I know Tom Mesereau said he should never have done it, which is probably true, but it didn't affect how I felt. It didn't make me think, oh, he's guilty, but obviously it was, we wanted more justice for him. And forever, obviously, then you get people saying, well, why did he settle if he was innocent? And I would always have to go through the various long-winded explanations and all of that kind of thing. I do remember that. And again, it was upsetting. The whole thing was upsetting.
And how did you cope then?
Well, I'm quite strong with these things, so it didn't send me into a deep depression. I think I was just a bit angry about the whole thing, but I was defiant. So I would always argue Michael's case. And I just believed that everything was going to be okay and that his name would be cleared. And so I was very bullish about it, as usual. I wasn't someone who'd be like scared to talk about him. I would still be just as loud a fan. And I think really, we didn't get much catharsis then until History came out. That was a very cathartic era because of the songs, and you just, for once, you're hearing from Michael and you're hearing his passion. And again, that really meant something. We needed to hear from him, and he sort of did deliver.
Yes. So what do you remember about the History launch then?
Well, so at that point, I've never wavered as a fan, but I wasn't going to be following him in quite the same way. Although I did see, I can't remember, about 10 History shows, I think. So that was me toning it down a bit. And that was quite funny, actually. When I finally showed up, I didn't go to the opening of History, but when I finally showed up, I think it was Amsterdam, Wayne Nagin was like, "Where have you been?" So obviously he was looking for Waldo too still at that point, but I wasn't there. I think Justin was, but I wasn't there. I was trying to sort of get on with my life and my career and just be slightly more normal. I don't know if anyone would think of me as normal, but I was trying to be more normal. So, but that whole era still with the album, I still took I can't remember. No, I wasn't at school at that point, but it was a big thing to go and get the album, hearing it, and just that whole era. Oh, I was there when they launched the statues along the Thames, and you were at London Bridge and they came through and there was 12 of us standing there clapping as this statue came through.
For this statue that actually looked nothing like Michael at all. I mean, the one on the cover of the CD does, but the one they floated up the Thames looked like a statue of Dolph Lundgren with a ponytail on it.
Yeah, it did. I think that I did, even at the time, I found it a little bit funny. We did find it a bit funny. Don't get me wrong, I loved the whole propaganda history statue thing. I loved it. Michael putting up two fingers, but at the same time I was knowing enough to realize that it was very over the top. Maybe even some people would find it comical, but yeah, I loved it. I loved that he was coming back with such, rather than being shy about it, he just dialed it up to 11 and just went for it. And obviously the music as well, Scream, and it was also powerful, DS, all of those songs that just were very angry but cathartic for fans to listen to, I think.
So History Tour didn't come to the UK until 1997, but the first leg in 96 did take in some of Europe. So did you travel to go to any of the first leg concerts?
Yeah, now this was funny. I was trying to get on with my career. I was making this little film in Malta, which where my family and my dad lived at the time. And David Lumby, my friend who I've mentioned before, he was starring in this movie, but he wanted to get out of there quickly because he wanted to go to, oh God, what was the first date of the history? Prague, exactly. He wanted to get to Prague, but I couldn't because I was sort of directing this film and I would have let a lot of people down. But Lumby managed to persuade us all to change the schedule so that he could go. And then a few weeks later I think I went to Amsterdam. That was the first one. So I traveled to Amsterdam and I think there were at least 2 shows there. I can't remember. 2 shows there. And then he did Amsterdam again on the second leg or something like that. So I saw all of the London ones. I saw Sheffield and I went to the ones in Amsterdam. So I think that amounted to 9 or 10. I can't remember.
What was your reaction to having been to Bad and been to Dangerous? What was your reaction?
My reaction. Okay, so Bad was, I mean, looking back on it with hindsight, was obviously the most exciting, amazing live tour. And Dangerous was just an amazing experience for me as well. History, I loved it. I did love it at the time. I liked the whole outfit and the opening and all of that. I probably already felt like it wasn't as good as the Dangerous tour, if I'm honest. I did notice the lip syncing. That didn't put me off in a way that maybe it put you off. But we had a bit of a laugh when the 1979 record came on for the Off the Wall medley and stuff like that. But it was still Michael Jackson. And I still loved watching him move and hearing all of the songs. And also there's a context to it as well, which is you're seeing Michael after having been declared by tabloids at the time, which you might not remember, it's over. I think there was a newspaper back then called Today, and they declared it was over. Actually, they don't exist anymore. And Michael was still going at that point. And I think it was just happiness to see him selling out stadiums and people still cheering after him, because there was some question. I think some sponsors like Pepsi pulled out and that kind of thing. So it was important on that level as well. Sure, yeah, there was a lot of lip syncing. That's true. But I still enjoyed it. But I was more chilled out. So at that point, they had what was called I think it was called the Golden Circle. So I wasn't always at the front row. Sometimes I'd casually wander in just before and just be at the back of the first barrier. So you'd still have quite a good view. So I wasn't quite as hardcore in the way that I approached it. But I was still, it wasn't because I was less of a fan. If the History tour was not his peak tour, it wasn't. But the album, the music, that was a peak of some kind. For sure, it was some of his best music was on that album. So it was a dual thing, really.
Did you also do the Brits? Did you go to the Brits?
Yeah, so me and David Lumby were at the front row, on the front row of the Brit Awards. Yeah, we were.
So you must have seen the whole Jarvis Cocker incident from a few feet away.
Yeah, well, so firstly, he performed with his group Pulp before Michael came on. And this was the North-South divide, I think, because Lumby was like, oh, I love Jarvis. I was like, he'll kill me for saying this now. And I was like, no, I don't like him. I don't like this kind of thing. I'm not into it. He seems like a bit of a tit. And then later on, we all know what happened. He invaded the stage.
Well, hang on. First, I'm gonna work on the assumption that everybody doesn't know, because we do have some younger listeners and international listeners. So just as a brief recap, Michael was performing Earth Song at the Brits, which is an award ceremony in London, a bit like our version of the Grammys, except much, much, much lower rent. And during his performance, Jarvis Cocker, who is a sort of a minor pop star from the UK, certainly today is a bit of a nobody, but at the time he'd had a few hits. He ran on the stage and disrupted the performance, and it was disputed to the extent to which he disrupted the performance. But he ran on the stage and disrupted the performance and said he was protesting because Michael was presenting himself in a messianic way.
Yeah.
And I think he got arrested.
He did.
Yes, because Bob Mortimer, the comedian, who is actually a solicitor who became a comedian, he went down to the police station and represented him, I believe. And in the days following, newspapers in the UK were running headlines including "Give him a knighthood." They were saying that Jarvis Cocker should be given a knighthood for disrupting Michael's performance. So you're there in the front row. How do you remember it going down?
So on that, the newspapers did a bit what they did with the World Music Awards later. First of all, they were attacking Jarvis Cocker, and then quickly they swayed, and the next editions were in favour of him. But anyway, back to I was there on the front row, and it was again, he was quite near on this front row, so it wasn't like a barrier you would have at a concert. So he was right there, and obviously it was I love Earth Song. That's probably one of my favorite songs. And yeah, okay, it's a very grandiose performance, but I didn't know what was going on. So when Jarvis Cocker came on at the point when Michael was actually on the cherry picker at the time, so he didn't have the courage to come on stage and protest when Michael was on the stage. He came in when there were sort of extras on the stage. And at first I didn't know what was going on. I just thought this is part of the performance. And then obviously as he started wafting his hands around his bum and being silly like that, I thought, okay, there's something wrong here. And we had all been given these nice little branded history torches before the show, clearly so that we could wave them during Earth Song, and it would look, sort of have that magical effect. But the anger rose in me as I realized what happened, and I threw my torch at Jarvis Cocker's head. Again, I don't condone this, but
did you hit him?
Almost. So it wasn't like point blank. And if you look at the footage, you can kind of see this little white dot just going right past his head. yeah, I was pretty angry about that as well, because everyone had been waiting for this performance. There were children on stage, and of course it was that cocky Brit Awards kind of British music industry, sneery. I think the next day, Brian Eno, the producer, came out and put a statement out saying this is bursting the bubble of American pomposity or something like that. I don't know. It seemed like the wrong environment for Michael, the Brit Awards, actually. And I remember a few people, I think Bon Jovi actually made a snarky comment. He said something like, "Oh, it's my son's birthday today, but I didn't want him to be backstage, if you know what I mean." And we all booed him and started. That didn't make the cut either, I don't think. Subsequently, I think he said nice things about Michael, but
Yeah.
how flaky these people are. But yeah, so I think that was another one where afterwards I didn't get to it because we snuck into the after party, but I heard that other fans had pelted Jarvis Cocker with flour and eggs. And he had made some witticism like, "Oh, I can bake a cake now." So, And I have randomly bumped into him a couple of other times. And I think there was one time he was at a Star Wars premiere and I didn't know he was going to be there. I was behind a barrier because I love Star Wars as well. That's my other thing. And I just hurled abuse at him, like, "Go home, Cocker, go home." And he sort of turned round and looked a bit flustered. And that was that, really.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, you could have been more abusive than that. He got off lightly there.
I didn't get into profanities and stuff like. The funny thing is, there were a tabloid thing at the time was doing this article where I think the word was they were calling him a ligger, which is like, getting his way into every party, every premiere, every. I think that's the word they would use, and they kept tabloids were almost mocking him for it. And after that, he wasn't seen about. The newspapers did something like, "Where's Jarvis gone? He was last seen at the Star Wars premiere." So I credit myself for having scared him off. I'm quite a normal person, really. What do you think, Charles?
I think you're a very normal person.
Thank you.
Most ways.
I'm talking about, past behaviour. It's all a bit juvenile.
That's funny though. So you were there. So you've been present. See, this is the great thing about your story is you've sort of borne witness to so much in your, due to your proximity. But you weren't following Michael around. So, for example, I know that David Lumbey was at the Video Music Awards in '95. So you, by that point, you'd sort of dropped off of the international jetting about and making chase.
Somewhat. I mean, I went to the Jackson Family Honors in Vegas. I think that was '94.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a concerted thing. It was like if I was able to go somewhere, or if there was a show, I think I'd go somewhere if there was going to be a show. In '99, I went to, what was it called, in Munich, MJ and Friends. MJ and Friends. And if he came to the country, I would go to the hotel and try and see him. But I just wasn't doing it as fervently as before for a few reasons. I was trying to get on with stuff. And also the fan community had got a little bit competitive and bitchy and just like, it was a bit of a headache sometimes. Although obviously loads of great friends as well. It just, it seemed more fun on a Dangerous tour. I'm not saying I didn't have fun after that, but it's with what you're saying, I did a bit of everything. Yeah. So sometimes I feel like I'm Forrest Gump, in history. Like I'm always somewhere there. Like obviously I got all of the amazing experiences, all of his solo tours, but then also sad things. Like I was in the Santa Monica court case for a day. I was at his memorial, but overall I always showed up where I could.
Was the MJ and Friends in Munich the one where the bridge collapsed? I forget whether that was Munich or Korea.
Yes. No. It was Munich because we were all horrified by it. I don't even know if the footage does it justice. When we were there, we're like, oh my God. And then after the show, we all rushed to the hospital he was at to see if we could find anything out. So it was a whole drama.
Yeah, in the video, it doesn't look like a big deal, to be honest. It is sort of just, it looks like the bridge comes down, but Michael just carries on and like, oh, what was that? So, but being there and experiencing it yourself, What did you see that gave you that horror?
Well, I think the perspective of it is you're on the front row. The perspective makes it look bigger, and it came crashing down. We knew it wasn't right. It came crashing down so fast. And then, we thought he was okay because he continued the show, but clearly he was just being a trooper. It was horrible. I can't remember if we could hear a bit more or something, but it was noted by all of us, and we rushed straight. As soon as the concert was done, we rushed. I think he had gone to probably some A&E somewhere in Germany, and would rush to see if we could find anything out.
Talk me through that. How do you know what A&E Michael has gone to?
So this is interesting because, again, well, actually, was the internet around then? Anyway, we always just found things out. So I think that sometimes we would get a little tip off from a driver or someone like that, because half the time Michael would want you to be there. He'd want fans to be at the hotel to greet him, or that famous time he was at the Munich town hall and there were all those people. He'd want people to be there, but obviously not when it came to a hospital thing. But there'd be German fans and they'd go, well, this is the nearest hospital, so let's go there. And often there would be a case where we'd get the wrong one, or we would not always have the correct luck. But it's a numbers game, so then eventually you'd have some wins, like the Give In To Me video and stuff like that. So you win some, you lose some.
Did you learn anything at the A&E? Oh, by the way, for anyone that's not English, A&E is accident and emergency. So in America, it would be the ER, and anywhere else, I don't know what it would be. But did you learn anything that day when you got there?
I have to say that I don't remember, and I don't think so, really. It was just ended with a bit of a damp squib, and we were just worried in general. I can't remember then when we found out what the result of the whole thing was. I think it's almost something we found out more in later years, just what an impact that event might have had on him, his spine, his back. So, I haven't got any more detail on that, I'm afraid.
My memory of the following period, as a younger person, I would have been in my early teens, is that Michael kind of disappeared for a couple of years. I mean, obviously, you were more plugged in. He might not quite have disappeared from your perspective, but my recollection from that era is that he disappeared for a couple of years and then he suddenly reappeared, and he didn't really look like Michael Jackson. And it was genuinely deeply shocking to me when he did reemerge. It was like, oh my God. What are your memories of that kind of period between MJ and Friends and Invincible? Were you chasing Michael around Monaco and so on, or did you have a couple of years off?
No, I wasn't. I was watching things like that on TV, or I was still, but I wasn't really going there as far as I can remember. However, one major thing I did do that same year, 1999, and again, this is the legend of David Lumby. He calls me up from Los Angeles. He had gone to Neverland, to the gates, as fans do, and then he'd gone down to the local pub or something like that, probably in Solvang or the nearest town. I can't remember exactly where. Anyway, he'd had a conversation with some uni students there who had, in a raffle, because apparently often Michael did things for the local community, and they had won tickets to go for a tour in Neverland. And well, this guy, who was just some, young American kid, wasn't that bothered really about it. So David Lumby, of course, managed to wangle a couple of those tickets off him. So he calls me up. I'm in London. God knows what I was doing. Nothing exciting. And he's like, right, you've got 2 days to get to Los Angeles. I don't think I had any money at the time. I was like, I've got to get. He was like, we're going to Neverland. We're going to Neverland. I was like, oh my God. Well, is this definitely going to happen? Can you guarantee that? Well, of course he can't. But he was like, no, look, I think this is going to happen. So I don't know, by hook or by crook, I found a ticket, got myself over there probably the next day. Then the day came, and we spent a whole day in Neverland Valley. Now, we didn't see Michael there. David thinks that he was there hiding in his room or something, but I don't know. At the same time, I heard he might have been abroad. But that was, even though he wasn't there, that was one of the greatest days I've ever had. That was Actually, Lumbee always likes to tell me I'm responsible for the 10 best days of your life. And so I don't know where he got the figure of 10 from, but that was definitely one of them. That was the whole Neverland tour. I mean, I fed his elephant, Gypsy. I held his snake round my neck, Madonna, the albino python. We watched a movie. I sat in his theatre and we watched Ghosts and had a barbecue, and we had a tour of his house, and we were allowed to take Reese's Pieces and stuff like that. I think I've got that in a box somewhere because I thought I can keep them. They're in a packet. That's not like the cake. So yeah, that was another, I could probably tell you a million things about that. That was amazing, a really amazing day to just go on his fun fair. I remember even, so 1999, we had a tour of his living room, and he still had, what I remember is he still had pictures of Lisa Marie up framed. I don't know what that means, but it goes hand in hand with her interview with Oprah after Michael passed, saying they were on and off for a few years. So that's a little bit of information.
Who gave you the tour? Do you remember who the tour guide was?
Yeah, Big Al.
Al Scanlon?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I think Lumbee has kept in contact with him. They're, sort of friends. Because then we saw him again at the memorial, sadly, and he gave us all this Neverland stationery and things like that. So yeah, there were a whole busload of kids there arrived. The inner city kids that show up, as they always say, they were there. And as far as I'm concerned, Michael wasn't even there. So that just kept going. And they all went in to watch Inspector Gadget, and they were all excited to go and watch Inspector Gadget in the cinema. That's when we got a tour of the house. So it was just a handful of us, including these sort of, nonplussed Americans who didn't seem to be that bothered by the whole thing. And I think that's another thing. Lumbee had offered him such a paltry amount of money for these tickets. I have to say it was something like 40 quid. He didn't know they could be auctioned for like 5-10 grand or something like that. So typical Lumbee, he always gets a bargain. And there was some awkward moment. I remember skipping forward afterwards. He goes, so how much money? He goes, he was a bit awkward, this teenager, and Lumbee probably gave him 50 quid. Is that okay? And I remember him going, maybe a little bit more. We sort of gave him another 20. I was like, that's fine. Anyway, it was a really, I mean, we were on Michael Jackson's bumper cars and going around on the carousel, and we had seen all of this stuff from Oprah Winfrey and whatever photo shoots he had done there, and it was so surreal going on his train. The train station had been built at that point, I'd like to say, but anyway, we won't go into that. But the whole tour, it was just magical. Yeah, it was Big Al, and he was so nice. Again, this is what surprised me. He just let us be at one point. We were just wandering around the fairground. At one point, some of his people came out with a baby tiger. I mean, that's not...
Huh.
I mean, feeding Gypsy the elephant that was a present from Elizabeth Taylor to him for Christmas, that's a surreal moment for me. It was disgusting afterwards. I had to wash my hands straight away because I had like elephant snot all over my hand. But still,
yeah,
what an honor.
Oh my God. And so that's late 99, did you say?
Yeah, I can't remember the date, but it was late 99 exactly. Yeah. September, October, something like that.
And then really, Michael, I mean, beyond Madison Square, did you go to Madison Square Garden?
I did. That was another thing me and Lumbee attended. Both concerts, yeah. I did go out to that. Those were the last concerts, really, weren't they? And we were there for 9/11, obviously. But yeah, that was another great experience. Obviously, there's interesting things to discuss about that show as well. Oh, another thing is, again, following David Lumbee, for the second show, we got there a couple of hours, or probably more than that, early. And because it was before 9/11, there was very little security. We just walked in to the arena. No one was really in there. And as we walked in, Michael was on stage rehearsing You Rock My World. I think he was playing around with David Guest, so they were having a little pretend karate fight. And Michael, for the second date, had brought on a bunch of dancers, a bunch of young dancers, and they were sort of cobbling together a routine to make it more interesting. Because I think it wasn't his greatest performance on the first show. And so obviously he thought he wanted to liven it up. But yeah, David and I are just sitting there at the side of the empty Madison Square Gardens watching Michael rehearse his number with the dancers and playing around with David Guest. And that was a bit of a voyeuristic moment, but quite a special moment, really.
Didn't you also get backstage or something? Is that where your picture with
Tucker?
Chris Tucker
Chris
taken
Tucker,
by Lenny Kravitz comes from?
Yeah. So I don't know. I liked Lenny Kravitz, but for some reason, I think Rush Hour had just come out, and I was just, I went backstage, and Michael wasn't around at that point, as far as I knew. So, and I saw Chris Tucker, who I was quite a big fan of.
Hang on. You've just done something again, which you just go, I went backstage. How did that happen? How did you get backstage?
Charles, you have to understand that's just what we did.
You just snuck in.
We would just get in there. I couldn't even remember how we got in there.
Okay.
We got in there. Like the way we even walked into, you just have half the time, it's your stance. So we probably weren't wearing Michael Jackson t-shirts. We were probably fairly smartly, actually maybe I wasn't, but you just go in like you're supposed to be there. That's how you do it. You walk in.
Yeah, I think you're right. I did it once. I walked into a venue with someone who was supposed to be there but had no ID or anything. They just showed up in like a tracksuit, and we just walked through the stage door, and everybody just assumes that if you've got the balls to walk in through the stage door, you must be supposed to be there. Because most people would just wait outside the stage door.
Yeah,
so
and we're all pros at that point. Yeah, we're all pros at that point. I mean, we reignited this recently to quickly skip forward. We were at the MJ musical. I know you were there too. And it was a press night, and his children were there. And we heard about the after party in Leicester Square, and we weren't invited, but we got in. They didn't really question us. They said, "Oh, have you got a wristband?" No, they didn't give us a wristband. You go, "Oh, just go down." And I got to speak to Prince, Michael's son, so that was funny. But so we haven't lost the old tricks. We can still do it. We still have it.
Yeah. So you get backstage, you meet Chris Tucker.
Yeah.
And you have the unbelievable balls to ask Lenny Kravitz to take the picture for you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he was around. He seemed friendly. And I can't remember if I hadn't realized who it was, or, I mean, I don't think so. But yeah, how rude of me. I'm sorry about that. And then afterwards, actually, now I'm conflating. I don't know if that was the first or the second night, because I can't remember. But certainly on the second night, we went into another, I think it was a different venue, but nearby, another after party. And we were there at midnight, and next to us was Kieran Culkin and Macaulay Culkin. And I was feeling uncharacteristically shy. I don't know why, or just something, like I didn't want to bother them. But I always wish I'd spoken to them, because I love Home Alone, and I just wish I would have got a photo or spoken to them, because they were right there. I think we kind of nodded hi. Maybe some of the others spoke to them. I don't know. But then hours after that, the whole world changed. So it was another surreal time of my life.
So, yeah, of course, the day after the second Madison Square Garden concert is the terror attack. So did you end up trapped in New York for a while?
Well, so many of my friends were there. Funny enough, subsequently, I found out my future sister-in-law was also there, but that's another thing. I was staying with my sister in the Bronx, so I was quite far out. I got the subway back at God knows what, 1 or 2 in the morning, and we had a day off the next day. We were going to go sightseeing. I do believe Justin and maybe my friend Isabel were on the Twin Towers the evening before. They had the last view of New York from there. But anyway, I was a bit worried because Lumbee was staying here. Other friends were staying on the other side of town. But I just woke up to the news, like my family calling me up and saying, "Are you okay?" And then I switched on the news and saw the second tower coming down. And I was stuck there for a few days. And also, I think the airline, there was a I went over then, the airport was dead, and they actually put us up in a hotel for a night because they were going to send us out, and then they changed their mind. So I was on the very first flight back to London. So it was a really scary time. Everyone was fine. There were everyone of my friends were fine, and there weren't any incidents that I knew of. But it was weird the smoke was in the air when you went through New York for days, the smoke and the sort of debris. It was scary because also at that time for all we knew, it was World War III. So it was just a strange time, but everyone was fine, and we got back home, and everyone's heard the stories of Michael getting out there, and was it Corey Feldman moaning that he wasn't given a bus home with him or something like that? Anyway.
Yeah, and the sort of urban myth about Michael jumping in the bus and driving Marlon Brando and Liz Taylor through the desert or something, or some nonsense, driving from New York.
That film that got cancelled, what was it, with Fiennes?
Joseph Fiennes, yeah.
Joseph Fiennes playing Michael. What a great idea that was, yeah.
Unbelievable. You know, the MJCast had a role in that getting cancelled because it wasn't me, it was Jamin, I think, but the MJCast tweeted about it, and Paris Jackson retweeted us with a comment saying what a disgrace it was that a white guy was playing Michael Jackson, and her intervention ended up getting the show cancelled, and MJCast ended up mentioned in Rolling Stone, I think. So it was our claim to fame.
Well, standing ovation to you. Obviously, you can hear from my stories, we were frontline soldiers back in the day, and I'm still there since leaving Neverland on Twitter and stuff like that. But actually, I feel like the younger fans, yourself included, MJCast, all of these people now, they're the frontline soldiers fighting the good fight. And I think it does make a difference, because I think that all of those things that you do, it sort of builds. And then, let's say Dave Chappelle, he had the courage to then, not that he needs courage, but he's obviously, this kind of information gets round, and then the anti-Leaving Neverland movement gathered steam. So I think these things are important. I think the ground swelling from the faithful fans is always important.
I want to shortly fast forward to the trial, because this is our Vindication Day episode, but there's one thing I need to touch on before we do that. So you go to Madison Square Garden in 2001.
Yeah.
But I must ask you about 2002, which is the year that you end up on the top of an open-top double-deck London bus with Michael helping him to lead a huge demonstration against Sony Music, which is just so unbelievable.
Again, this is really surreal. Yeah, what we...
So just for context...
Yeah,
for anyone that's a young fan and doesn't know the backstory or whatever, Michael was in dispute with his record label, Sony Music, because he said that Sony had failed to adequately promote his album, Invincible, and that the disappointing sales were the fault of Sony. And so he basically launched a campaign against Sony Music. He gave speeches in New York where he said that Tommy Mottola was racist. He said that the music industry was racist and that there was a conspiracy to damage his record sales, presumably for financial reasons linked to the advantage it would give the record label in terms of trying to obtain his Beatles catalogue, as it was commonly known, the ATV catalogue. But anyway, as part of this big fallout with Sony, Michael flies to London and is due to appear in a London nightclub for what was called the Killer Thriller Party, where he was going to make this big speech about his fallout with Sony. But around the same time, I forget whether it was the same day, but while he's there in London, he ends up renting a double-decker open-top bus and driving through the streets of central London, leading a protest against Sony Music. And Gratian was on the top of the bus with Michael, one of the maybe 10 people that were on the bus. So you've got to tell us how that came about.
I will. Take a wild guess who is responsible for me having this experience.
All roads lead to David Lumby, of course.
All roads lead to
and
Lumby.
We want David Lumby on the show, by the way, but at the moment he's refusing. But
he wants
we'll
to
keep pressing.
He's letting it sizzle. You know, he wants some hype to build up. He wants you to beg him. I'm joking. Okay. Am I though? No. So hopefully he will do it, because he's quite a character, as I'm sure, and one of my best friends, obviously. So I'm editing my first ever music video, because that was my profession at the time. I directed and then was editing my first music video with hope that one day I would direct a Michael Jackson video. That was my aim in life at that point. Anyway, I'm working on this video at the edit suite, you know, under a deadline, and I get a call from David Lumby. And he says, "We're going on a bus with Michael Jackson today. Get here as quick as possible. Renaissance Hotel, Holborn." So, of course, I dropped everything, didn't worry about the deadline, ran out of there as quick as I could, ran to a newsagent on the way, picked up a camera so that because I didn't have, you know, we didn't have smartphones back then. So I got one of those disposable cameras you could buy at a newsagent, and got there. And at first I tried to get myself but into the hotel, there was a security guard out there who said, no, of course not. But then eventually Lumby, we met up and we went in. I just want to say, so firstly, how this happened was David Lumby was speaking to, is it Mike Peruk? His security
Mike
guard?
Peruk, I think his name was, yeah.
Yes, that's right, yeah. So he was speaking to him outside the hotel, because he was outside the hotel just to see Michael like a fan. And Mike LaPeruk said, "Oh, Michael quite wants to go to this protest," because Michael hadn't organized it. I think fans had organized it. And I knew nothing about that protest, by the way. I wasn't going to go. I didn't really know about it very much. So David Lumby said to Mike, "Well, why doesn't he get a double-decker bus? And he could go on a double-decker bus." This is very David Lumby-ish. He'll come up with an idea. Anyway, so then a bit later, Mike comes back out. This is being recalled to me by David Lumby. And he said, "Yeah, Michael wants a bus. So can you get the bus?" And this would not have happened in Wayne Nagin's reign, I could tell you that. So, yeah, Lumby hires a double-decker bus, private double-decker bus for Michael. And obviously that's when the phone call to me came in, and I was sweating to get there, lest I missed that. God knows, I was sprinting across town, planes, trains, and automobiles. And then I got there, and eventually we got past the security guard. I think one of Michael's guys came down probably Mike, to pick us up. And it's like a whirlwind, because I'm like, just now I was editing in Stockwell in London, and now I'm, headed to Michael Jackson's hotel room. So we're going down the corridor, and then we're going down the corridor, I don't know what it was, 5th floor or something like that. And Michael's already walking out of the door, and he's walking towards us with quite a pace on. And he shakes our hands, hi. At this point, I don't think he really remembers me, because I look quite different. I had short hair, put on a bit of weight, a bit older. He didn't really, and I wasn't one to say, "Hey, I'm Waldo too." So he was like, I think he thought we had organized the event, which we hadn't. But he was like, right, this is all about awareness. He was really sort of wired and on one. This is about awareness. I need everyone to know about this. And anyway, we were walking down the corridor, and that again I was like, wow. it was just such a moment. I'm like, oh my God, Michael Jackson just shook my hand. We're pacing down the corridor towards the lift. And also he's got Karen Faye and someone else, I can't think, the camera guy.
Hamid
exactly. Thank you. And possibly Matt Fides as well. But at one point we get to the lift, and then the only people in the lift are Michael, Karen Faye, I think Hamid, I'm not sure if it was him, and me and David Lumby. We're the only ones in the lift going down. I thought, now I've spoken about things being surreal, but this is the single most surreal moment of my life, because I'm in a lift, small environment with Michael, and he's going through a bunch of pictures that a fan had given him, or the fans had given him. And one of them was something like him in a Peter Pan outfit on stage or something like that. And he's grabbing his crutch. And he goes to Karen Faye. He says to Karen Faye, "Oh, look how much I'm grabbing there." and Karen Faye says, "Not that much." And then he goes, "Oh, well, more than your boyfriend." And me and Lumbie are standing there looking at each other, thinking we're witnessing this kind of Michael Jackson banter, the kind of thing we'd never heard before. And it was just so funny, really. But I think that was his era of being quite loose-lipped and let his guard down a bit. Everyone, he's kind of infamous around that era, isn't he? The Invincible and the post-Invincible era. But that was a really funny moment.
Okay, so can you tell us about getting on the bus and that experience?
Yeah, so we'd just come out of this surreal experience in the lift of this 5-star hotel, witnessing, this banter with Michael Jackson. And then we come out into the courtyard, and there's a big gate and hundreds of fans screaming on the other side. Well, I'm used to being on the other side. I'm not used to being there with Michael. And at that point, it was just the only fans were me and David. So we were standing there, and I'm sure some of my friends on the other side, I could just see a blur, were thinking, why the hell is he there? Anyway, the double-decker bus is parked there. So Michael waves at fans. We stand there. I think there's a few photographs of that moment as well. And we get on the bus at that point, and we're on the lower floor of the bus. And it's actually the other Hamid and Karen have gone off to another part of the bus, I think maybe to the top. And it's just David and I and Michael downstairs sitting at the back of the bus. And he tells us he's very keen for us to get as much of the fan memorabilia. He really wanted the letters, the banners, the gifts, and he sort of put us in charge of getting them from fans and putting them there. But we sat there for quite a few minutes before the bus took off towards Great Marlborough Street, which was round the corner. And I took a few photos, and he was holding up a banner that said "Sony sucks." And that's another bit of banter, because he then sort of leans into me and he whispers, "But what exactly do Sony suck?" And I was like, is this Michael Jackson talking to me right now? And I said, I can't remember what my response was. I was like, "Oh, that's nasty, Michael," or something like that, something equally lame. But that was quite funny. And I think he liked that line, because I heard that he used that again with another fan told me he did the same thing later. Anyway, the bus starts going, and there's loads of fans running after the bus. And again, I'm sitting there with Michael, and I'm thinking, this is so bizarre being on this side. And Michael suddenly got quite wired, I would say. He went into a totally different mode. It was so interesting to see that he suddenly became, he wasn't sort of the relaxed character from the elevator just now. It was like he was slightly high on all of the fans chasing after the bus. And we saw Waldo. So he said, let him on. So the bus stopped. Waldo and a couple of others came on. So then there were a few more fans on there. And then eventually we got to Great Marlborough Street, where this demonstration was going on outside the Sony building. So Michael wants to go to the top of the bus. So that was another strange thing. We were sort of walking up the stairs, and Michael just suddenly up the stairs of the bus, and Michael just dropped on these dirty London bus steps. And me and Lumbie were standing behind him thinking, oh my God, So if anyone thinks, oh, he was a germphobe and all of that, this would certainly disprove that. Anyway, then we sort of walked past him and went up to be on the top layer. And he said, make sure you get all of the gifts, I want all of the cards from everyone. I thought that was quite sweet that he really wanted all of these gifts. And then he came up, and obviously he popped up at the top of the bus, and everyone went mad outside. All the fans went mad, and he was sort of, he had the megaphone and he was pumping his fists, and it was quite a moment. Yeah, Dave and I and the others were all standing up there. I took quite a few photos up there as well. And that's why I also spotted Louis Theroux down in the crowd, and he asked if he could get on the bus. I said, no, Maybe that's a bit of a red herring there, but anyway, because he was trying to make a documentary with Michael, I think the one that Martin Bashir ended up doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we were on this bus, and then after a while, it started driving off. And I think that day, something like the World Cup or the Euro, I don't know about football, some big football match was going on. And there was a sort of second floor pub round the corner from the Sony building. And we were sort of slowly going around there, and they were all watching the game on the big screen inside the pub, windows open. And suddenly you'd notice a couple of them turn around and do like a double take, or more like a triple take, when they saw here's Michael Jackson on a bus, and you could see their eyes flaring at the sight of Michael Jackson with a megaphone chanting "Sony sucks" or whatever he was doing. And you could just see that. It was so funny to watch that, honestly. And then we sort of drove on to Oxford Street, and everyone was running down the middle of Oxford Street. I'd never seen anything like that, really. But I think Michael was he wanted there to be a few more people there. And he was sort of saying, why was it arranged when there's football and all of that? So I think he wanted it to be a bigger thing, and the football somewhat, not that not all of his fans were watching football in the pub. I don't know. Anyway, it was kind of this manic scene going down Oxford Street. And he had his megaphone. And again, I've got some pictures of that as well. Maybe I'll put them on Twitter afterwards.
Maybe we'll share some on MJCast Twitter, and maybe use some in the artwork or something like that, the episode artwork.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Louis Theroux and you mentioned Bashir. So you've got the high of this experience of being on the bus with Michael. But what follows is a series of scandals. So you have, in late 2002, you have the baby dangling incident. And then in early 2003, you have the enormous scandal of the Bashir interview. And that leads, of course, ultimately to the news in November 2003 that Neverland has been raided for a second time. Michael has been accused of child molestation for a second time. This time, he is arrested and he is charged. So, although you were slightly less involved than you had been, you weren't chasing Michael around the world anymore and all that stuff. Nonetheless, that must have been a difficult time. So, it's the second time now. Was there any part of you that thought, maybe I should just wait and see what happens here, or did you immediately default to a position of not believing and just wanting to throw your support behind Michael?
Well, if I'm honest, I saw the headline, so straight away the question was, who is this accuser? Who's the boy this time? Of course, my instinct is to not believe it, but it didn't come out straight away. It didn't come out instantly who it was, as I remember. But I think we had our suspicions who it was going to be, because there was something odd about the way Gavin Arvizo acted in the Bashir interview. So there was a whiff of something odd. So when it was him, I wasn't surprised, and I straight away thought, this just doesn't feel right. And also there's a whole thing where if you've done a settlement in the past, it's almost a miracle that there hadn't been a copycat case sooner than that, to be honest with you. Because if someone's open for business like that, a millionaire or billionaire, whatever he was, is willing to settle, you'd think there'll be someone else lurking in the wings ready for a piece of that action too. Well, enter the Arvizos, really. So I think very quickly, I think the internet was more of a thing at this point. Or was a thing at this point. There were the forums. I forget what they were called, King of Pop or something like that. I can't remember. I used to go on these forums. So the information got out there much quicker. So it didn't hit me quite in the same way as the first lot, but yeah, it did hit me hard again, because I thought, oh, here we go again. So it did consume me still. It did consume me, the whole court case. I was reading transcripts, I was going online. It somehow did consume my life right up until the verdict. So it was still a big thing. But no, I didn't doubt Michael, really. But at the same time, as I said before, if anything had come out to convince me otherwise, why would I defend him? That's how I feel about it. However good Smooth Criminal is, or however good his music is, if I thought that that was his real character, then that's not something that I would support. I'd feel very upset. I'd feel betrayed. I just couldn't find it in my heart to support that.
And you actually did fly out and attend part of the trial, but presumably you got in through the lottery, did you? Through the every day they had a lottery for the public seats in the gallery.
That's right. I was able to go to Los Angeles for 2 or 3 days, and I got lucky. So I went with my friend James and Lumbee, of course, and we went to the courthouse very early in the morning. I think you had to get there at something like 5 a.m. And there was a lottery, as you said. And my friend James won the ticket, but he knew I was the bigger fan, so he gave me his ticket. So yeah, I got into court that day.
Wow.
And it's a strange thing. It's a strange thing because, as you know, I've done I've had some great experiences. I feel blessed to have had these amazing experiences. And as time goes on, especially as younger fans emerge, you go, wow, I did these things, and they're sort of legendary moments in Michael Jackson's career. So you'd think, oh, you get swept away. Oh, it's a lottery. I've got this ticket. Oh, right, I'm going in. And then it hits you. This isn't a concert or a show, or this isn't seeing Michael Jackson, the pop star. This is seeing Michael Jackson, the defendant. And so you're going into court. It was really sad. There was something really sad about it, obviously. First of all, I got into the courtroom. I saw Tom Sneddon, and we sort of locked eyes, probably because I was staring at him, and he thought, oh, God, here you go. Here's another one. I knew we had to behave, so I wasn't going to shout at him like I would have at Jarvis Cocker or something like that. It was obvious. I think Mesereau had drawn the line to fans and said, listen, you have to behave. So, but it was just here's the guy we'd been singing along to DS for years, and he was a supervillain. And I was staring him in the eye, and he was sort of terrifying. He was terrifying to look at, and just really gave me the creeps. Then Michael came in, and I think it was after the whole thing with the pajamas in court. I think it was day 15. I double-checked this before doing this podcast. It was trial day 15. Michael came in looking worse for wear. I sort of turned to my right, and he was coming through the, I think, revolving, or the maybe not revolving, but the double doors of the court. And I could see that in the middle, they had to prop him up. He sort of had a little stumble. He looked so weak, and his clothes actually looked slightly disheveled, and he looked so thin. And I thought I could see his sort of spine, poking through the back of the jacket. And I felt really sad. It was the first time seeing Michael Jackson. Usually it's an adrenaline rush, but this time I was like, what have they done to him? This case shouldn't even be in court. And here he is. You could see the toll on him and his drawn face, and just really heartbreaking, actually. And they sort of managed to sort of prop him up, and he got through and sat down. And then it was, I think, the prosecution. So it was Gordon Auchincloss. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, or Auchincloss, one of the two.
Auchincloss, it was him. And so the witness I remember was for the prosecution. She was called Lauren Wallace, and she was the stewardess for Extrajet. And she was for the prosecution, but I think it was one of many that backfired on them. So she sort of entered the courtroom. She had this like Sharon Stone blonde bombshell vibe, and she came in and she sat down. Straight away, I felt like she had a little twinkle in her eye for Michael. There was clearly some kind of affection between them. I'm not suggesting anything beyond they knew each other and were fond of each other. And then she gave testimony how she had been on about, 20 flights with him and served him alcohol and food. And I suppose the prosecution were trying to say, oh, he's this guy who puts wine in Diet Coke cans, as if that was something nefarious. I don't know, drunken children on the flight, or just that there was something nefarious about it. But actually, by the time Mesereau got onto his cross-examination, you realize, actually even before that, you realize that she had great affection for Michael and she liked him. And she just said, no, there was nothing untoward. There weren't any drunken children. Yes, she did put wine into empty Diet Coke cans for him, obviously to keep up that image of him being, people weren't really aware of him being much of a drinker. He was this, carrot juice swilling vegetarian. Well, in fact, we found out he was putting wine in Diet Coke cans and eating KFC. That's what he liked, really. And that's what this revealed. But there's no crime there. And actually, it just seems like he's responsible. He's a role model to children and those around him. And he doesn't want to be seen knocking back alcohol, I guess. But she even said she used to hide mini alcohol like gin or tequila inside the toilets. And she just seemed like there was a little, like I say, a little sort of rapport between them. I think, as I remember it, they even smiled at each other in the beginning. So that was a total backfire. And to see the way Mesereau handled it, I felt better afterwards because I thought he's got this. It's really a feeble case that they're propping up here. And Mesereau's tearing through them like it was brutal. So that was my experience of court. And of course, I repeat the thing that other people have noted, which is you had all of these other villains like Diane Diamond and all of that on the press side, rapidly scribbling down all of the accusations, go out, report it. And then it was almost, I don't know about almost empty, but at least half empty for the defense side. I remember seeing the Sky News, because Sky News did these recreations each day. I remember seeing it, and it didn't seem familiar. I thought, is that what happened that day? They had Michael sort of sobbing into his hands or something like that, as I remember. And I thought this is being lost in translation. But I remember Lumbee asking me, how's this going? Because he wasn't so much into reading all the transcripts the whole time and all of that. I said, I felt positively about it, actually. Obviously, you're still scared, but I thought I did believe he was going to win.
In terms of being in court, what do you remember about the presentation of the defense versus the prosecution? I
did have these prejudicial thoughts that the prosecution seemed a little bit like these kind of people you'd see in a movie, like small town American cops. I don't know, the whole thing, or lawyers, the whole thing seemed a bit opportunist to get this big star into their town and show him who's boss. So I thought they seemed sloppy. I did hear that the other lawyer, Ron Zonin, was a slick one, but I really can't verify that. But I wasn't impressed by them. I actually felt assured that they were so bad, whereas Tom Mesereau just had this aura of control, calm. So he wasn't an aggressive person. Like, I think that some lawyers can fight in an aggressive way. I think he was just very firm, fair. He had this aura about him as if he was just out there to get justice. And he was just masterful, the way that he dissected their case, asked the right questions. He knew when to stop. He knew when the point had been made. And I got that from the transcripts. But also, one thing I will say, I was lucky to have witnessed that in person. So it wasn't a fan event like usual, where you're like, oh my God, there's Michael. Like I said, it was shrouded in sadness. But I was glad to have witnessed what filled me with positivity. I did believe that Michael would be cleared. I really did.
But you weren't there for the verdict. You were back home.
I had to go back. I think the next day we won 2 more lottery tickets. But because I had gone in the day before, they were for James and they were for Lumbee. And it was something boring, like a half-day thing with someone called Louise Palanca, I think, and someone who married one of the Ron Zonin, who I mentioned before, something weird like that.
Well, you say boring. I mean, Tom Mesereau's cross-examination of Palanca reads like a comedy script. It's absolutely devastating because she came into court and told basically the exact opposite story of what she told the police. So when Tom Mesereau got up to cross-examine her, he was putting all of these things to her and saying, and isn't it true that you previously said this? And isn't it true that you previously said that? And she was denying it. And then he said, are you aware that your interview with the police was tape recorded? And she sort of looked defeated and said,
God.
I found that out yesterday or something like that. And he says, how did you find that out? And she says, Ron told me. He said, do you mean Prosecutor Zonin told you? And she said, yeah. And of course, on the day of the verdict, Louise Palanca announced on her blog that she was now in a romantic relationship with Ron Zonin, the prosecutor. Now, we don't know when that relationship started, but we do know that it was ongoing by the time of the verdict.
Hush.
And yes, so Tom Mesereau's, his cross-examination absolutely humiliated her because she was caught red-handed. She just completely reversed her test. So when she spoke to the police, she slagged Janet Arvizo into the ground. I mean, she literally said that Janet Arvizo was mentally ill, that she was a crook, that she didn't want her in her house because she was a crook, that the kids were trained con artists. And then when she came in for the prosecution to give her testimony, she was just saying the exact opposite. It was bizarre. She told the police that they stole money from her, that they tricked her into giving them tens of thousands of dollars, and then they didn't spend it on what they said they would. They spent it all on a giant TV, and she was really pissed off about it, and they ripped off her contractor. Anyway, to me, that's not a boring day. It's a very, very important day. But
sorry, maybe I misspoke. It might not. She might have been over more than one day. What I believe is it was some kind of half day, or I would have known these things at the time, but they've slipped my mind half of the details. I remember certain things better than others. But yeah, sorry, maybe it wasn't. But I just remember that they came out and they hadn't had a sort of full day like I did.
Okay.
So it might have been she might have been over multiple days, but I don't really recollect. But yeah, the whole thing, it annoys me when, I know it annoys you too, when people sort of say, oh, well, because he was cleared, but so was OJ and that kind of thing. And I think, well, do you know what? If you were actually listen to this case, it was an annihilation. It was beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Arvizos were crooks. They'd made multiple allegations and against different people, multiple lawsuits. They had changed their timeline in the beginning. It was beyond, it shouldn't have ever have gone there. I mean,
yeah.
So I think, but still, you had this fear. So when it came, you asked me about the verdict. I wasn't there, but the first person who called, I was hiding behind my sofa because although I was confident, you still have this thing of the stakes are very high. The thought of Michael Jackson being taken away in cuffs to go to jail, well, it's just horrifying. So, but I felt confident, but at the same time I was nervous. I was sitting there, and then the first person who calls me, of course, afterwards is David Lumby. And we're both blubbing. We can barely talk to each other because we're like happy tears, but we're like, it was so funny because we're not people who really cry together or anything like that, but we were blubbing. It was quite comedic. And then I started blasting Billie Jean outside my window and things like that. We were, really just so relieved, but obviously very happy. But yeah, I had friends who were there. So like some of my friends, Claire and Menifer, they were there, and they're in some of those photos running down the street. And so they witnessed all the doves, and some of them would speak to Michael in the limo on the way to Neverland. And I just think he really appreciated all of the fan support and all of the fans. Some of the fans were there for weeks at the trial, and I wasn't able to, but I was there in spirit. I was reading about it every day, and it was affecting my life. Some people could argue more than it should have, but it just did.
So did you ever meet Michael again after the trial?
Yes, I did meet Michael. Yeah, so that was the World Music Awards.
2006.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So everyone, I was with some fans at the hotel that he was staying at, and he was going off to the show, and some fans were already there to go to the front row and all of that. And I kind of forfeit that, and a few of us decided, let's stay at the hotel, inside, not outside, in the lobby. And that's funny, I was bump into Adrian Grant at these things. Of course, he was actually, pretty much a friend of Michael, so he'd always be there, and he'd be like, how are you in here? How am I always at these things? All of these things I've done over the years, he would be there. And we all have just broken in. So anyway, we were waiting for Michael to come down to leave to the show, which eventually he did. And we were all politely, a handful of us were lined up in the lobby, because obviously they allowed us to stay there. They knew what we wanted, but they didn't really seem to mind, actually. And Michael came down he looked really good that night, I thought. And he came down in his nice sparkly jacket, looking really good. And he came round, shook all of our hands, said hi. We wished him good luck. He had told some other of my friends before that it wasn't a performance, because there was this whole thing going around at the time that he was going to do a performance.
Yeah,
and
they issued a press release saying he was doing a performance. I remember it was a big debacle where they had promoted it as a performance. Yeah.
But Michael had told people, no, they're saying it's a performance. It's not a performance. I don't want you to be disappointed. And I remember relaying this message on the forums, the MJ 2005. I can't even remember, one of those forums I used to go on. And I got my head bitten off. It is a performance. Why are you ruining our fun? I was saying, look, don't be disappointed. It's not a performance. Who are you? And all of that stuff. I thought, right, I'll get out of this lane. So Michael was keen to tell people it was not a performance. So I knew it. I wasn't expecting anything like that. But anyway, it was great to meet him. I think there's a little video of somewhere of me shaking hands before he heads off to the World Music Awards, which then we followed, and obviously we were at the award show. I believe you were too, weren't you?
I was there, yeah. Yes, so that's the last time you met him.
Well, not quite. So then he came over for the This Is It, the famous, infamous This Is It press conference, which I was at.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think after that, I can't remember if it was a day after or whatever, he went to see Oliver, and everyone was he was coming into the theatre, and I sort of ducked through one of the other doors on the other side of the theatre and staked my way in because no one was paying attention. And I found him going up the stairway to get to his seats or the box or wherever he was. And I said hi to him there. But he had his children with him. So I can't remember, he was like, where's Prince? Or he was making sure they were all there. But I said hi to him, and the kids were there with their masks on. And so that was the last time I really sort of had a closer interaction with him. But we didn't it's not like we had a chat or anything, but it was nice to see him. The time I spoke to him the most was on the bus, because that was like the afternoon, and we sat there for a while and we spoke about all kinds of things, but that's probably, don't have time to tell all of those tales, but yeah.
We'll get you back on for another episode for sure. So how many This Is It shows did you have tickets for?
I can't remember. What I remember, it was really different. I had front row tickets for the opening night. And the only way I got those was I queued overnight. I worked out that was going to be the only way. Yeah. Because the whole scam of ticketing had started to explode at that time, via GoGo, whatever you call it. It's like there's some conspiracy going on, isn't it? The tickets go straight to there. So it looks like they've got a face value. Ticket's only £70. But I've got hundreds of Michael fans all over the world. None of them got front row, A block, anything like that. None of them. And so the only way I thought was to go and physically queue outside, which, that's not my style. I'm like fake passes and worming my way in. But I went old school and I queued outside. We stayed in a tent overnight, and I was almost at the front of that queue, and I got front seat tickets, row A, opening night. I did feel a bit funny after the press conference. I have to say, I was like, this is strange. There's something wrong. I'm not trying to say I was foreshadowing anything. I just thought usually he puts an album out. But I had started to get, I was like, okay, I started to get a bit excited that we were going to see Michael perform again, at the same time as being slightly concerned at how it would go. But so I might have got more. I was planning to get more, but actually Justin and a few of the other fans, Waldo, were out in Los Angeles watching the rehearsals. And when Waldo got to meet Michael there, and he actually complained to Michael and said, do you know that none of us can get front row tickets? It's going to be all of these champagne Charlies. Sorry to abuse your name. I think that was a phrase that they used. So and he was horrified. He hadn't clicked. He probably thought it was like the old days were all standing and all of that. So he was actually horrified by that, according to Justin's account. And then I don't know if it was a couple of days later or a few days later, they were still at the Staples Center trying to listen to rehearsals and stuff like that. And then one of Michael's crew, obviously, if you ever get Justin on, he can correct the details, but this is the essence of the story, said that he has put mosh pits at the front just for the hardcore fans, and there's going to be a list. I think I was lucky enough to hear that maybe I might have been on that list because he wanted all of the excitement and people to be, he didn't want, half-interested rich folk on the front row.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a bit of a strange time. And you've probably heard there was sort of these I think Talitha might have mentioned something about these emails where fans were worried about the state of his weight and his health, and I was in on that whole thing. I think Karen Faye was part of that as well, and they were trying to get Elizabeth Taylor to do something. There was sort of some kind of dark cloud over the whole thing, and obviously, what happened next.
Yeah. For someone like you, whose life had been so intertwined with Michael, from traveling around the world to, being on the bus with him, meeting him so many times, camping overnight to get the tickets to that last ill-fated concert tour or concert run. What impact did it have on your life when he passed away? Was there like a void? What was your life, particularly in those first few years after he was gone?
I've always been lucky enough to have great friends, great family. I enjoy the work that I do. I'm quite resilient and I've got a lot of positive things that I'm lucky about. But it was devastating. I know it's hard for some people to understand that, maybe more casual fans or, normies, for want of a better phrase, civilians. But it was devastating to me, and I think the people around me generally knew that for several reasons. It's it's heartbreakingly sad. Michael had his children, but also it was like a light had gone out of our lives in a way. It was every time he came to town or we saw a show, it was adrenaline fueled. It was magical. It was exciting. Just the sight of Michael Jackson coming towards you, he had such an aura, you'd get goosebumps. It was always exciting. After the bus trip, I was walking back down the road buzzing. So all of these things, especially when I look back, I think, wow, what a time. So it was a big loss for us, even in terms of music. I don't want to get into Invincible with you, but even after that, I was like, what's he going to do next? As far as I'm concerned, he'd done enough. So if he had gone on to just enjoy his life and not worry about anything like that, sadly, we know about the money troubles and cash flow and all of that. It was devastating. So it was, I don't know, was it like a family member or like a hero? Someone I'd always look up to, someone who had inspired me, entertained me since I was a child, since I was 7 years old. And I remember things in my life like this. Was it before Dangerous or after Dangerous? Was it Bad? Oh, around the time of Bad. And that's how I might not even remember what else I did those years, but I'll remember the dates of his tours and performances. I can always say that. So it was crushed. The world stopped for a while. And we did go to his memorial, and all of us dressed in white, and you can see us there on the footage as sort of behind the family, where all of my friends who were equally devastated, we all went in white in solidarity for him. And that was, I mean, I never watched that back, but that was the worst fan experience, obviously. The memorial, it was just, it seems stupid to call it a fan experience, but that was just, I was in a daze, really, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, of course you can. I was always worried about that happening one day, and then that day came, but more than anything, he'd given us enough, and I just wish he could have enjoyed the fruits of his labor and sort of gone into gentle retirement. Of course, I was looking forward to seeing him, but for me, he didn't have to do 50 dates or any more tours. He didn't have to do that. Obviously, he had his reasons, but I wish he hadn't. Anyway.
Well, it brings us on to the last question for today, which is the question we ask everybody at the end of a one-on-one interview. And that question is, how do you think that Michael Jackson should be remembered?
He should be remembered, and he is remembered, and he will be forever remembered as the greatest pop star of all time. And I know people might quibble over the word pop or whatever, but I just mean that the greatest star of all time. And as an entertainer, as a songwriter, as a human being, but actually for me, as I said before, it's the music. It's really the music that at the heart of it, that's what matters. So yeah, the Billie Jean routine as part of it is great, but the music, all of his music, not just the big hits, but also, when I say the big hits, they were hits, but the later music as well, Stranger in Moscow, all of these, the great wealth of music that he left. And then on another level, for his name to be cleared as much as possible. As far as I'm concerned, it was cleared in 2005 definitively. Obviously, Leaving Neverland threw a little spanner in the works, but already you can see that fading into insignificance. I'm not saying it didn't do any damage, but the success of the musical and all of these future projects, whether fans are fully on board with them or not, they're markers of Michael's enduring legacy. And I don't think these things will ever silence him, because most people don't believe it, and the music's too good, and his legacy's too good. We've always been there to fight for him, but what heartens me is now there's a whole young generation of people who feel so passionately about it. So he continues to inspire. I'm always thankful for what he's brought to my life, because it was escapism, excitement, magic, and that's what he should be remembered for.
Thank you very much, Gratian, for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, really.
I know we've wanted you on for ages, so thank you so much for coming on. And
you're welcome.
Before I finally let you go, he said at 1:39 a.m.
I'm just warming up now.
Well, how can people, if people want to follow you on social media to see any photos you may put out, or memories, or when you're next going to be on the MJCast or whatever, where can they find you?
Okay, so X or Twitter, that's the place. And my handle's at Gratian Dimech, my name.
Do you want to just spell that?
Gratian and then Dimech.
And so that's the place to find you, is Twitter.
I don't post much, but if people are interested, maybe I'll post some pictures and some other pictures I've had of my fan experiences.
Great. I know that Jamin would want me to remind everyone, in case they've all been lobotomized, that if you want to find the MJCast on any social media pages, then amazingly, you have to search for the MJCast. So counterintuitive though that may be. So if you want to find us on Twitter, then you go to Twitter and we're at the MJCast. On Instagram, we're at the MJCast. On Facebook, Jamin, I'm going to go through the list. I don't know why we bother, but on Facebook, drum roll, we're the MJCast. And I think we're on something called Mastodon, or something. I don't know what we are on there. I'm assuming it's the MJCast. But if it's not, Jamin, you can dub me later. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Vindication Day episode 2024. Next year is going to be a big one, 20th anniversary of the verdicts. So we'll have to start working on something special right now. Thank you again, Gratian. Thank you for joining us. And
thank you, Charles, and thank you, Jamin. It's really been I love the MJCast, and it's been a pleasure.
It's been a privilege to have you on. And thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.